T-minus 10, 9, 8,
The clock is
7.
operating. We're underway.
Tranquility Base here.
Endeavor, go at throttle up.
Willkommen bei den Heute-Nachrichten. Amerika bereitet sich auf eine der schwersten Naturkatastrophen seiner Geschichte vor. Mittlerweile haben 4 Bundesstaaten den Notstand ausgerufen. Hunderte Einsatzkräfte kämpfen mit Flugzeugen und Booten gegen die Ölpest im Golf von Mexiko. Seit der Explosion der Bohrinsel vor 11 Tagen sprudeln aus dem Bohrloch jetzt täglich 800.000 Liter Öl ungehindert ins Meer. Hoher Wellengang macht weiterhin alle Bemühungen zunichte, den Ölteppich mit schwimmenden Barrikaden einzudämmen. Tierschützer haben unterdessen Stationen eingerichtet, um ölverschmierte Tiere zu retten. Wegen des heftigen Südwinds wird erwartet, dass das Öl spätestens am Montag auch die Küsten von Mississippi, Alabama und Florida erreicht. Matthias Vornow an der betroffenen Küste in Louisiana. Wie bewerten die Amerikaner das Krisenmanagement ihrer Regierung?
Ja, die Kritik an der Regierung in Washington, die wächst ganz einfach deshalb, weil sehr viel Zeit verschwendet worden ist. Man hat in Washington den Beschwichtigungen von BP, also dem Ölkonzern, der diese Plattform betrieben hatte, tagelang blind vertraut. Man hatte darauf vertraut, dass die gesagt haben, wir werden diese Lecks schließen, dass relativ wenig Öl angeblich nur austritt und dieser Ölteppich die Küsten nie erreichen wird. Jetzt weiß man, das Gegenteil ist der Fall. Es droht die größte Umweltkatastrophe seit Jahrzehnten. Und jetzt mit einiger Verspätung beginnt die Regierung Obama ihr Krisenmanagement. Obama selbst wird morgen hier in die Region reisen und er wird damit natürlich auch symbolisch zeigen, dass die Bekämpfung dieser Umweltkatastrophe jetzt Chefsache ist.
Krabben frisch aus dem Meer. Eine Delikatesse, ohne die die Fischer an der Küste Louisianas nicht leben könnten. Denn sie bedeutet für sie ihre Existenz. Sollte das Öl bis in ihr Fanggebiet gelangen, wäre das für Wayne Leggett und seine Kollegen der Ruin. Das Öl setzt sich hier in den Lungen der Krabben fest. Dadurch sterben sie. Die Krabben können nicht ohne Lunge leben, genau wie wir. Das würde uns mindestens für die nächsten 10 Jahre das Geschäft zunichte machen. Hier in Boothville, Venice, haben sich die Fischer in einer Turnhalle versammelt, um im Schnellverfahren zu lernen, wie sie zumindest ihre Gesundheit vor den Giftstoffen schützen. Sie alle wollen mithelfen, das Öl so schnell wie möglich zu beseitigen. Seit der Explosion der Bohrinsel vor 1,5 Wochen sind vermutlich schon mehr als 6 Millionen Liter Rohöl ins Meer geflossen. Gestern erreichte der Ölteppich bereits die Küste von Louisiana. Bedroht sind auch Mississippi, Alabama und Florida. In so einer Größenordnung haben wir das noch nicht erlebt. Wir hoffen zumindest etwas tun zu können. Aber das hängt auch davon ab, wie lange das Öl noch ausläuft. Fest steht wohl schon jetzt, dass der Ölteppich im Sumpfgebiet des Mississippi-Deltas Hunderttausende Tiere töten wird. Fischerei und Tourismus drohen Schäden von vermutlich 5,5 Milliarden $.
Soweit die Situation am Mississippi-Delta und wie es insgesamt vor der US-Golfküste aussieht, hat Verena Fels für Sie zusammengefasst.
Die Situation am Golf von Mexiko wird Stunde um Stunde bedrohlicher. Erst hatte Louisiana den Notstand ausgerufen, jetzt haben Mississippi und Alabama nachgezogen und auch für Teile Floridas gilt er schon. Der Ölteppich hat mittlerweile eine Größe von mehr als 20.000 Quadratkilometern erreicht und ist damit in etwa so groß wie Hessen. Besonders gefährdet ist das Marsch- und Sumpfland im Mississippi-Delta im US-Bundesstaat Louisiana. Es gilt als Naturparadies mit hunderten Fisch- und Vogelarten. Hier ist das Öl schon angekommen. Seit der Explosion und dem Untergang der Bohrinsel müssen die Behörden nun tatenlos zusehen, wie das Öl aus gleich 3 Lecks ungehindert ins Meer fließt. Nach Schätzungen der Küstenwacht sind schon mehr als 6 Millionen Liter ausgelaufen. Jeden Tag kommen fast 800.000 hinzu. Mit schwimmenden Barrieren versuchen tausende Helfer, die Ölpest aufzuhalten. Doch das Wetter arbeitet gegen sie. Ein heftiger Südwind und hohe Wellen peitschen die klebrige Masse immer weiter vorwärts über die Barrieren hinweg. Es wird erwartet, dass das Öl bis Montag auch die Küsten von Mississippi, Alabama und Florida erreicht.
Bombenalarm in New York. Auf dem Times Square in Manhattan haben Polizisten eine Autobombe entdeckt. Der von Zehntausenden Menschen besuchte Times Square in New York ist offenbar nur knapp einer Katastrophe entgangen. Polizisten entdeckten in einem Auto eine Bombe, die nach einer Fehlzündung noch qualmte. Wer hinter dem versuchten Anschlag steckt, ist noch unklar.
Bombenalarm auf dem Times Square. Ein Straßenverkäufer beobachtet, wie aus diesem Auto Qualm aufsteigt und alarmiert die Polizei. Die geht kein Risiko ein und evakuiert den gesamten Times Square, ebenso einen Teil des berühmten Broadway. Tausende Touristen und Besucher der vielen Theater müssen den Platz verlassen. Ihr sollt jetzt nicht hier sein, sagte uns die Polizei. Wir warten jetzt erstmal ab, was passiert. Sofort wird ein Bombenräumkommando der Polizei angefordert. Ein Spezialroboter untersucht den verdächtigen Wagen, dann ein Knall. Der Sprengsatz ist entschärft. In dem Wagen waren 3 Propangasflaschen und mehrere Feuerwerkskörper. Dazu noch 2 Benzinkanister mit jeweils rund 19 Litern Inhalt, 2 Uhren mit Batterien und Drähten. Offenbar explodierte die Bombe nur nicht, weil der Zünder nicht funktionierte. Für den Bürgermeister auch ein Verdienst aufmerksamer Bürger. Wir haben großes Glück gehabt. Mein Dank gilt den wachsamen New Yorkern und den Polizisten. Wir haben ein möglicherweise tödliches Ereignis verhindert. Die Hintergründe der Tat sind bislang noch völlig unklar. Die Ermittler erhoffen sich von den Aufnahmen der vielen Überwachungskameras nähere Hinweise auf den oder die Täter.
Uli Oppold in New York. Uli, wie weit ist man mit den Ermittlungen gekommen und wie sicher ist man sich, ob es sich um einen Anschlag gehandelt haben könnte?
Ja, also es ist schon ziemlich beunruhigend, was Bürgermeister Bloomberg gesagt hat. Wir haben großes Glück gehabt, da ist ein tödlicher Anschlag verhindert worden. Das sagt im Grunde genommen alles über die mögliche Sprengkraft, die diese Bombe gehabt haben könnte. Und er hat ja auch ausdrücklich nochmal einem T-Shirt-Händler am Times Square gedankt. Der hat nämlich am Abend gesehen, wie da auf einmal Rauch aufstieg aus diesem Geländewagen, hat dann einen berittenen Polizisten alarmiert und auch der hat sehr schnell reagiert, Großalarm ausgelöst und dann haben eben die Bombenspezialisten diesen Sprengsatz in diesem grünen Geländewagen entdeckt.
Wie reagieren die New Yorker auf diese Meldung?
Die New Yorker sind natürlich zutiefst beunruhigt. Sie wissen natürlich auch, dass an diesem diesem warmen Frühlingsabend, da waren ja Zehntausende am Times Square unterwegs. Man mag sich also gar nicht vorstellen, was da alles hätte passieren können. Und sofort sind natürlich die Erinnerungen an den 11. September wieder da. In den vergangenen knapp 9 Jahren haben ja die New Yorker in einer Art ständigen Alarmbereitschaft gelebt. Und jeder weiß, New York ist ein Terroristenziel. Das hat auch Bürgermeister Bloomberg heute noch einmal gesagt, aber gleichzeitig auch die Bevölkerung beruhigt und hat gesagt, New York ist nicht gefährlicher als jede andere Großstadt dieser Welt.
Wer könnte hinter so einem Anschlag stecken? Gibt es da schon Spekulationen?
Also da tappen die Behörden noch völlig im Dunkeln. Internationaler Terrorismus wird nicht ausgeschlossen. Allerdings soll dieser Sprengsatz, wie Bürgermeister Bloomberg sagte, amateurhaft ausgesehen haben. Also man möchte da noch keine Rückschlüsse ziehen. Es gibt natürlich auch viele lokale Extremistengruppen. Vor 2 Jahren gab es am Times Square einen kleineren Sprengsatz, der detoniert ist vor einem Rekrutierungszentrum. Vielleicht gibt es da irgendwelche Zusammenhänge. In jedem Fall werden jetzt die vielen Aufnahmen der Videoüberwachungskameras ausgewertet und so wie es aussieht, hat man wohl einen ersten Hinweis. Da soll zumindest auf einer Aufnahme dieser grüne Geländewagen drauf sein. Jetzt wird man natürlich schauen, dass man in den nächsten Tagen da etwas mehr herausfindet.
Uli Oppold aus New York, Dankeschön.
And good morning to our viewers around the world, in the United States as well. A busy morning here, 4:15 in the morning Eastern Time here in Atlanta, Georgia, where I sit, our world headquarters of CNN, where we're keeping an eye on a situation involving one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world. In fact, the most popular in the United States, where a car bomb has been found in New York's Times Square. You're looking at video now. We've been keeping an eye on this situation now for the past almost 12 hours, but 10 plus hours for sure now. Where? I'll tell you what we know now. A bomb was found, or bomb-making materials, I should say, around 6:34 Eastern Time last evening. A vendor, a street vendor, a T-shirt vendor in Times Square. There are plenty of vendors out there, but one happened to spot some smoke coming from an SUV. It's a green Nissan Pathfinder. You're seeing video of that vehicle being checked out from last night on Times Square. Saw smoke coming from it, and he then alerted a police officer of what he saw. That police officer then called it in, and in fact, Times Square and the busy theater district had to be evacuated. Some shows did go on Broadway. However, Others did not. Police literally went into theaters telling people to get out, but the iconic, the popular tourist destination of Times Square had to be shut down for a time. Here now, a live picture where this scene continues this morning. They continue to check out this vehicle. We've told for the most part, whatever was in this car has been rendered safe at this point, but still those materials being taken elsewhere to be checked out. Now, what was in this vehicle? According to the mayor, 3 propane tanks, 2 5-gallon tanks of gasoline, a couple of clocks, electrical wires, batteries as well, everything in there that could possibly be needed to make a bomb. And in fact, they call this bomb-making material. The mayor says no idea who did this or why. No one is in custody. There is no suspect description, at least at this point, that the police have put out. It appears to be a car bomb, is what the mayor says, and they're saying that a major tragedy was averted after these explosive materials were found. Many people are familiar with these iconic images and the bright lights, quite frankly, of Times Square. New York has 47 plus, maybe 50 million visitors that go to that city every single year, and about 80% of them make a stop in Times Square. They see about 40 million visitors every single year. And no matter what time of day or night it is, Times Square is a busy, bustling place. That is what it looks like right now. It is not busy right now. It is quiet. It is, quite frankly, a ghost town other than a lot of police vehicles. People are checking, the people that are there now trying to render the area safe. No clear idea of exactly when it might be open 100% again to foot traffic, to pedestrians, to visitors who come to this place every single year. And again, this is a busy place 24/7. Even in the wee hours of the morning like it is right now, you would see people up and down the streets of New York City's Times Square. Now, in particular, this bomb was found on 45th Street between 7th and 8th. This was a Nissan Pathfinder, a green vehicle with tinted windows. And again, a man saw smoke coming from it. Again, he's being a Vietnam veteran, we're told, but this is a T-shirt vendor who just alerted police. He was the first one who saw it. Oftentimes, Homeland Security said the first line of defense has to be citizens who take it upon themselves to be vigilant and notice things suspicious and bring it to the police's attention. And that's exactly what happened in this case. We do want to let you know that right now, some officials are actually saying, not sure just yet whether or not this is a clear indication that there is international terrorism involved. We don't know yet if there is some kind of a connection to Al-Qaeda or another terror network. However, at the same time, we got a statement from the governor of New York, Governor Patterson, who in the last line, I'll just skip right to the last line of his statement, saying state and federal law enforcement will be turned to bringing the guilty party to justice in this act of terrorism. He specifically uses the word terrorism in his statement. We do have it up. I'll go ahead and show you the whole thing here, but this is from Governor Patterson and his statement saying, tonight we owe an incredible debt of gratitude to the heroic actions of the New York City Police Department and to a single vigilant New Yorker who identified a suspicious vehicle near Times Square in New York City. Luckily, no one is hurt, and now the full attention of city, state, and federal law enforcement will be turned to bringing the guilty party to justice in this act of terrorism. Again, some saying right now, still too early to know exactly what this is about. Sure, it was a suspicious vehicle. Sure, there are bomb-making materials in there, but not sure yet if this is connected to some international terror group, or quite frankly, we have seen in this country, unfortunately before, acts of domestic terrorism as well. But still, the investigation, we're told numerous leads are being followed right now. But the headline for you all right now, for those of you watching us here in the U.S. and around the world, that in fact, the most popular tourist destination in the United States, possibly the target of terrorism after the mayor, after the police commissioner come out and say that bomb-making materials were found inside a car that was left at Times Square. Take a listen to the mayor, Michael Bloomberg, just a short time ago.
It was made up of consumer-grade fireworks that you can buy in Pennsylvania and drive into New York, and the wiring was nothing that looked amateurish, I think is a nice way to phrase it.
And you hear the mayor there, the way he put it. This didn't look like something just thrown together by an amateur. It didn't look amateurish. And another quote he gave us is that it certainly could have exploded and caused a pretty big fire and decent amount of explosive impact. So again, the headline here is that, in fact, Times Square, you're seeing a live picture of it there. Times Square, usually a busy, bustling place, no matter what time of day or night. Right now is a ghost town just filled with federal officials, with local officials, police, and other authorities who are right now trying to check out exactly what happened and what possibly was on someone's mind who left a vehicle on Times Square on 45th between 7th and 8th with bomb-making materials in that vehicle. Important also to note about this car, it was a Nissan Pathfinder, a green one with tinted windows. We're told the tags on the vehicle did not match the actual vehicle. Police did go back and track down those tags. Those tags belong to another man. They talked to that man who said he actually took a vehicle to a dump yard, actually just dropped it off at a junkyard, and apparently the tags were left with that, according to this man. So the tags did not match the vehicle there in Times Square. Police now believe they did spot this vehicle before it was parked on Times Square. They did see it on surveillance video that was as it was traveling apparently to Times Square. Now, what they've been able to glean from that, we don't know just yet, but they are going back to look at a lot of surveillance video, trying to possibly get a suspect description. Also, right now, the terror alert level in this country, in the United States, has not been elevated. It stays at yellow. That is an elevated level, but still, it hasn't gone up to the next level. So right now, terror officials, Homeland Security officials do not feel the need to possibly put the country on a higher alert. Again, we heard from the mayor, Michael Bloomberg, a short time ago. Continue to play you some of what we heard from him just a short time ago. Listen once again.
Thanks to alert New Yorkers and professional police officers, we avoided what could have been a very deadly event. I'm going to begin by telling you what we know and what we don't know. At about 6:30 this last night, an alert T-shirt vendor who is a Vietnam veteran noticed an unoccupied suspicious vehicle on 45th Street just off 7th Avenue, a few blocks from where we are standing. He alerted police officer Wayne Radigan of the NYPD mounted unit, who was on his horse Miggs patrolling Times Square. Officer Radigan saw the vehicle, a Nissan Pathfinder, which had smoke emerging from vents near the back seat, and he also smelled gunpowder. He, with the help of police officers assigned to Operation Impact, immediately evacuated the area and called for the fire department and more police. Firefighters, emergency service officers, and the bomb squad responded, and the bomb squad confirmed that the suspicious vehicle did indeed contain an explosive device. There were gas cans and bomb-making materials in the car. The experts at the bomb squad are removing them as we speak. Who abandoned the car and why are under investigation by the NYPD. Commissioner Kelly will fill you in on the details, but I want to thank the professionals at the NYPD and the FBI, as well as the fire department and the Office of Emergency Management for their work tonight. But most of all, the alert vendor and Officer Radigan of the mounted unit. You know, we often say that when a terrorist is caught, he has a map of New York City in his pocket. And that's a conversation I had earlier tonight in Washington. And tonight is a further reminder of the dangers that we face.
New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg from just a short time ago. He was talking about his evening earlier, quite frankly, a conversation he had. That conversation in Washington, D.C., where there was the White House Correspondents' Dinner. It's a very festive, traditional event that happens, that the president always attends, kind of a fun, festive event. That the tone changed a bit as the buzz started to go around the room. We're told about the incident and what happened in New York City. But Bloomberg was apparently there in D.C. for that dinner, where he was, in fact, able to discuss what was going on in his city with the president and others. Also, we can let you know the president has been updated on what's happening and is monitoring the situation in New York. The president has certainly a busy day, an early day on his schedule. He was scheduled to go down to the Gulf Coast today, is going to the Gulf Coast, where he's keeping an eye, and the federal government keeping an eye on that, trying to avert really a natural disaster with that oil spill that happened in the Gulf Coast. The president going to visit there sometime this morning, but also monitoring what's happening in New York. Our Alan Chernoff has been monitoring this for the past several hours.
Terrorangst in New York. Mitten auf dem belebten Times Square verstecken Unbekannte eine Bombe in einem Auto. Die Millionenmetropole entgeht nur knapp einer Katastrophe. Ist gestern Abend nur knapp einer Katastrophe entgangen. Im Herzen der Stadt, am dicht bevölkerten Times Square, hatten Unbekannte in einem Geländewagen eine Bombe platziert. Sie war gezündet worden, explodierte aber nicht. Das FBI hat die Ermittlungen übernommen. Aus New York berichtet Ulrich Oppold.
Schwer bewaffnete Antiterroreinheiten patrouillieren am Times Square. Die ganze Nacht über ist der zentrale Platz in Manhattan weiträumig abgesperrt. Es ist 18:28 Uhr Ortszeit, als ein T-Shirt-Verkäufer Qualm an einem dunklen Geländewagen bemerkt. Das verdächtige Auto steht mit laufendem Motor und Warnblinkanlage direkt vor einer Filiale der Bank of America. Der Straßenhändler wird misstrauisch und alarmiert einen berittenen Polizisten. Ein Beamter riecht Schießpulver, offenbar von einer Fehlzündung der Bombe. Er ruft sofort Verstärkung und löst Terroralarm aus. Die Polizei beginnt damit, den Times Square zu räumen. Ohne Panik verlassen tausende Menschen den Platz, die eigentlich an diesem warmen Frühlingsabend zu den Broadway-Shows und Restaurants wollen. Auch ein Hotel wird zeitweise evakuiert. Diese Bilder einer Überwachungskamera zeigen den mit Menschen übervölkerten Times Square wenige Minuten bevor der Sprengsatz entdeckt wurde. Kurz nachdem die Polizei die Straßenkreuzung sperrt, herrscht gespenstische Leere. Wir haben großes Glück gehabt. Mein Dank gilt den aufmerksamen New Yorkern und unseren professionellen Polizisten. Wir haben ein möglicherweise tödliches Ereignis verhindert. Sofort machen sich Sprengstoffspezialisten an die Arbeit. Ein Spezialroboter untersucht den Geländewagen und entschärft den Sprengsatz mit einer kontrollierten Detonation. Da kam Rauch aus dem Wagen, er kam aus den Fenstern. Polizisten haben gerade die Leute weggedrängt. Da hat es in dem Auto geknallt. In dem dunkelgrünen Geländewagen vom Typ Nissan Pathfinder waren 3 Propangasbehälter, mehrere Feuerwerkskörper, dazu noch 2 Benzinkanister und eine Metallbox. Außerdem 2 Uhren mit Batterien und Drähten. Noch Stunden nach dem Vorfall sammeln sich tausende Schaulustige an den Absperrgittern, machen Fotos oder Videos, während Sprengstoffexperten alle Spuren sichern. Die Bombe explodierte offenbar nur deshalb nicht, weil der Zünder nicht funktionierte. Die genauen Hintergründe der Tat sind noch unklar. Ob ein Einzeltäter, Terroristen oder lokale Extremistengruppen dahinter stecken, sollen jetzt die Ermittlungen zeigen. Am Morgen danach ist vielen Menschen noch gar nicht bewusst, dass New York vielleicht nur knapp einer Katastrophe entgangen ist.
Wir haben noch eine Tochter und die hat uns eine SMS hier gestört. Und da stand drin, dass hier eine Bombe gefunden worden wäre auf Times Square, wo wir eigentlich noch nichts von wussten. Wir wussten wohl, dass da irgendwie was passiert war, aber keine Bombe.
Die Behörden haben Passanten aufgerufen, ihre Fotos durchzusehen. Auch von den Aufnahmen der Überwachungskameras am Times Square erhoffen sie sich nähere Hinweise auf den oder die Täter.
Ja, und wir schalten rüber nach New York zu unserem Korrespondenten Ulrich Oppold. Uli, gibt es irgendwelche Hinweise, wer hinter dem gescheiterten Anschlag stecken könnte?
Im Moment noch nicht, aber es sind umfangreiche Ermittlungen angelaufen, an denen auch das FBI, natürlich die New Yorker Polizei und das Heimatschutzministerium beteiligt sind. Auch Präsident Obama lässt sich laufend über den Stand der Ermittlungen informieren. Es gibt einen ersten Ansatz, so ist dieser Geländewagen wohl wenige Minuten bevor der Sprengstoff entdeckt wurde, von einer Überwachungskamera am Times Square aufgenommen worden. Jetzt werden diese Bilder erst einmal ausgewertet.
Tja, und wie geht die Stadt, wie gehen die Menschen in New York mit dem Attentatsversuch um?
Also die New Yorker haben gestern Abend wieder eine bewundernswerte Gelassenheit gezeigt. Das hat man gesehen, als dieser riesige Platz, da waren ja Tausende, vielleicht sogar Zehntausende auf dem Times Square, als der geräumt wurde. Auf der anderen Seite ist es natürlich so, dass viele jetzt besorgt sind. Die Erinnerung an den 11. September wurde wieder wach. Auf der anderen Seite haben die New Yorker in den vergangenen 8,5 Jahren diese Terrorangst eigentlich auch ganz gut verdrängt. Und sie wollen sich ihre Lebensfreude einfach nicht nehmen lassen.
Vielen Dank. In New York, Ulrich Oppold. Noch heute wird US-Präsident Obama in der Katastrophenregion erwartet. Seine politischen Gegner werfen ihm vor, er habe viel zu spät gehandelt. Und sie hoffen nicht ohne Schadenfreude, dass die Ölkatastrophe dem Präsidenten politisch schaden wird. Mehr von Volker Albers und Friede Gutmann.
Auch wenn er für die Katastrophe nicht verantwortlich ist, auf einen herzlichen Empfang in Louisiana muss sich der Präsident nicht einstellen. Vielmehr auf den Vorwurf, dass er die nahende Umweltkatastrophe bisher unterschätzt hat.
Die Trümmer hinter mir erinnern bitter daran. Vor 5 Jahren wurde die Bevölkerung hier von der Regierung Bush erbärmlich im Stich gelassen, als diese viel zu spät auf Hurrikan Katrina reagierte. Seitdem sind die Menschen hier sehr empfindlich und Barack Obama tut gut daran, sich hier zu zeigen.
Noch hält der Wind das Öl ein Stück von der Küste weg. Doch wenn es erst kommt, wird das schwarze Gold zur schwarzen Pest. Braune Pelikane brüten in den Mangrovensümpfen und auch die seltenen Weißkopfseeadler. Dieser ölverschmierte Vogel dürfte ein Vorbote sein von dem, was in den nächsten Tagen und Wochen kommen wird. 75% aller Zugvögel, die von Nord nach Südamerika fliegen, machen in den Sumpfgebieten Rast. Bei jeder Ölkatastrophe können erfahrungsgemäß nur etwa 15 bis 20% der Vögel gerettet werden. Zukunftsangst auch bei den Fischern, die sich jetzt zum Meersäubern anheuern lassen. 2,5 Milliarden $ könnte der Schaden allein für sie betragen. Wissen Sie, das betrifft nicht nur uns in Louisiana, das betrifft die ganze Nation und ihre Fischereiindustrie. Satellitenbilder zeigen, wie weit sich der Ölteppich vor der Küste schon ausgedehnt hat. Schlimmstenfalls werden bis zu 15,9 Millionen Liter pro Tag auslaufen, befürchtet der Innenminister. Einheimische sagen, sie riechen das Öl bereits.
And I also want to commend the vigilant citizens who noticed the suspicious activity and reported it to the authorities. I just got off the phone on the way down here with Mayor Bloomberg to make sure that state and federal officials are coordinating effectively. Since last night, my national security team's been taking every step necessary to ensure that our state and local partners have the full support and cooperation of the federal government. We're going to do what's necessary to protect the American people, to determine who's behind this potentially deadly act, and to see that justice is done. And I'm going to continue to monitor the situation closely and do what it takes at home and abroad to safeguard the security of the American people. Now, we just finished a meeting with Admiral Thad Allen, our national incident commander for this spill, as well as Coast Guard personnel who are leading the response to this crisis. And they gave me an update on our efforts to stop the BP oil spill and mitigate the damage. By the way, I just want to point out, I was told it was drizzling out here. Is this Louisiana drizzle right here? They gave me a sense of how this spill is moving. It is now about 9 miles off the coast of southeastern Louisiana. And by the way, we had the governor of Louisiana, Bobby Jindal, as well as parish presidents who are taking part in this meeting because we want to emphasize the importance of coordinating between local, state, and federal officials throughout this process. Now, I think the American people are now aware, certainly the folks down in the Gulf are aware, that we're dealing with a massive and potentially unprecedented environmental disaster. The oil that is still leaking from the well could seriously damage the economy and the environment of our Gulf states, and it could extend for a long time. It could jeopardize the livelihoods of thousands of Americans who call this place home. And that's why the federal government has launched and coordinated an all-hands-on-deck, relentless response to this crisis from day one. After the explosion on the drilling rig, it began with an aggressive search and rescue effort to evacuate 115 people, including 3 badly injured. And my thoughts and prayers go out to the family of the 11 workers who have not been found. When the drill unit sank on Thursday, we immediately and intensely investigated by remotely operated vehicles the entire 5,000 feet of pipe that's on the floor of the ocean. In that process, 3 leaks were identified, the most recent coming just last Wednesday evening. As Admiral Allen and Secretary Napolitano have made clear, we've made preparations from day one to stage equipment for a worst-case scenario. We immediately set up command center operations here in the Gulf and coordinated with all state and local governments, and the 3rd breach was discovered on Wednesday. We already had by that time in position more than 70 vessels and hundreds of thousands of feet of boom. And I dispatched the Secretaries of the Interior and Homeland Security, the Administrator of the EPA, Lisa Jackson, who is here, my Assistant for Energy and Climate Change Policy, and the Administrator of NOAA to the Gulf Coast to ensure that we are doing whatever is required to respond to this event. So I want to emphasize, from day one, we have prepared and planned for the worst, even as we hoped for the best. And while we have prepared and reacted aggressively, I'm not going to rest, and none of the gentlemen and women who are here are going to rest or be satisfied until the leak is stopped at the source, the oil on the Gulf is contained and cleaned up, and the people of this region are able to go back to their lives and their livelihoods. Now, currently, the most advanced technology available is being used to try and stop a leak that is more than 5,000 feet under the surface. Because this leak is unique and unprecedented, it could take many days to stop. And that's why we're also using every resource available to stop the oil from coming ashore and mitigating the damage it could cause. And much of the discussion here at the center was focused on if we and when we have to deal with these mitigation efforts. Thus far, as you can tell, the weather has not been as cooperative as we'd like on this front, but we're going to continue to push forward. I also want to stress that we are working closely with the Gulf states and local communities to help every American affected by this crisis. So let me be clear. BP is responsible for this leak. BP will be paying the bill. But as President of the United States, I'm going to spare no effort to respond to this crisis for as long as it continues. And we will spare no resource to clean up whatever damage is caused. And while there will be time to fully investigate what happened on that rig and hold responsible parties accountable, our focus now is on a fully coordinated, relentless response effort to stop the leak and prevent more damage to the Gulf. I want to thank the thousands of Americans who've been working around the clock to stop this crisis, whether it's the brave men and women of our military or the local officials who call the Gulf home. They are doing everything in their power to mitigate this disaster, prevent our damage to our environment, and help our fellow citizens. And during this visit, I am hoping to have the opportunity to speak with some of the individuals who are directly affected by the disaster. I've heard already that people are understandably frustrated and frightened, especially because the people of this region have been through worse disasters than anybody should have to bear. But every American affected by this spill should know this. Your government will do whatever it takes for as long as it takes to stop this crisis. This is one of the richest and most beautiful ecosystems on the planet, and for centuries its residents have enjoyed and made a living off the fish that swim in these waters and the wildlife that inhabit these shores. This is also the heartbeat of the region's economic life, and we're going to do everything in our power to protect our natural resources, compensate those who have been harmed, rebuild what has been damaged, and help this region persevere like it has done so many times before. That's a commitment I'm making as President of the United States, and I know that everybody who works for the federal government feels the exact same way. Thank you very much, everybody.
That is President Barack Obama having just addressed the issue of the oil spill and, of course, those affected by it. He said he'd had various meetings. He called it a massive and potentially unprecedented environmental disaster. He acknowledged that it could well jeopardize the livelihoods of thousands of Americans who, he said, call Louisiana and the surrounding states affected their homes. He said they'd identified the authorities 3 leaks in the oil rig that, of course, sunk 10 days ago. And he said the last of those leaks was discovered just on Wednesday. He did importantly say that the U.S. authorities would spare no resource, that they would do whatever it takes, and for however long it takes. He said his commitment to those affected was that they would be compensated.
Erste Ausläufer haben die US-Küsten erreicht. Wegen der stürmischen See schwappte das Öl über die errichteten Barrieren. US-Präsident Obama erklärte in Venice, es handele sich um eine Naturkatastrophe von noch nie dagewesenem Ausmaß. BP trage die volle Verantwortung. Der Energiekonzern kündigte die Übernahme sämtlicher Kosten an. Zum Auftakt der UN-Atomkonferenz hat Irans Präsident Ahmadinejad die USA angegriffen und damit einen Eklat ausgelöst. In seiner Rede sagte Ahmadinejad, die USA bedrohten mit ihren Atombomben den Iran und auch andere Länder. Viele Delegierte, insbesondere aus europäischen Ländern, verließen unter Protest den Saal. Die internationale Gemeinschaft verdächtigt Iran, heimlich Atomwaffen zu bauen. US-Außenministerin Clinton entgegnete, Iran wolle nur vom eigenen Atomwaffenprogramm ablenken.
Unsere Korrespondentin Marion Schmickler ist für uns dorthin gefahren, wo die Ölpest als erstes erwartet wird, nämlich Dauphin Island im Bundesstaat Alabama. Eine der ältesten Siedlungen der USA, normalerweise eine Idylle mit einem über 10 Kilometer langen Sandstrand. Da versucht jetzt die Nationalgarde, die Natur mit allen Mitteln gegen den nahenden Ölteppich zu schützen.
Wo hat sich der Krebs versteckt? Gerade noch haben ihn die Soldaten gesehen, dann ist er unterm Auto verschwunden. Jedes Tier wollen sie retten, auch wenn sie wissen, dass hier schon in den nächsten Tagen Tausende toter Meerestiere und Vögel anlanden könnten. Seit heute bauen die Soldaten der Nationalgarde neue Sperren auf in Dauphin Island. Sie sollen die Urlaubsinsel sicher machen vor dem herannahenden Öl. Wie Schwämme sollen die Sperren Öl aufsaugen und verklumpen. Der Bürgermeister checkt die Lage. Er sorgt sich, dass seiner Insel ein Desaster droht. Wir wissen, mit welch gewaltiger Bedrohung wir es hier zu tun haben. Deshalb machen wir alles Menschenmögliche, um die Insel zu schützen. Wir hoffen aber, dass es nicht so schlimm kommt, wie Sie voraussagen. Das Meer seit Tagen aufgewühlt. Noch ist das Öl hier nicht zu sehen, doch seit heute Morgen liegt ein beißender Ölgeruch in der Luft. Viele Häuser stehen buchstäblich im Wasser. Die braunen Schlieren könnten genau unter ihnen anlanden, die Dämpfe in die Häuser ziehen. Diese Dämpfe können Kopfschmerzen verursachen, brennende Augen, Atemwegsinfektionen, Übelkeit und Schwindel. Es wird vor allem Leute mit Asthma treffen. Solche Dämpfe sind sogar mit Krebs in Verbindung gebracht worden. Wie lange noch können die Menschen in Dauphin Island leben? Muss die Insel vielleicht sogar evakuiert werden wegen der giftigen Dämpfe? Unbewohnbar für Jahre? Für die Helfer drängt die Zeit. Schon morgen Abend könnte das Meer den Ölschlick in Alabama anschwemmen.
Bei solchen Auswirkungen ist die Politik natürlich alarmiert. Gestern kam US-Präsident Obama an die bedrohte Küste, um zu zeigen, dass er sich kümmert. Gleichzeitig wollte er aber auf keinen Fall, dass die Menschen den Eindruck bekommen, die Regierung sei verantwortlich für die Katastrophe und für deren Kosten. Das sei Sache des Ölkonzerns BP, sagte der Präsident. Und er sagte es sehr deutlich. Hanni Hüsch über raue Zeiten für die Ölindustrie.
Als müsse er nun auch noch die Pressearbeit für BP höchst selbst erledigen. Im Gespräch mit den besorgten Fischern von Louisiana ging der Präsident ins Detail, wie der Ölgigant die sprudelnden Quellen zu schließen gedenke. Also, sie werden in den nächsten Tagen eine große Kuppel über die sprudelnden Quellen setzen, das Leck damit abdichten und das Öl nach oben pumpen. Schnelle Heilung verspricht das nicht. Die Fischer wollen zusagen, wer zahlt, wenn die braune Brühe Austernbänke, Fischbestand und damit ihre Existenz zerstört. Er muss es richten. Tony Hayward, BP-Chef und hemdsärmlich im Katastrophengebiet unterwegs. 10 Milliarden $, vielleicht mehr, der Imageschaden für den Ölmulti gewaltig. Aktien auf Talfahrt. Und so tourt der Brite durchs amerikanische Fernsehen. Terrain zurückerobern. Es ist zwar nicht unser Unfall, damit weist er auf den Besitzer der Plattform, BP hat nur geleast, aber es ist unsere Verantwortung, die Lecks zu schließen und die legitimen Interessen der Betroffenen zu berücksichtigen, heißt zahlen. Heute ist er in Washington, Gespräche hinter verschlossenen Türen auf dem Kapitolzügel. Da wird er sich kritische Fragen gefallen lassen müssen, der Ton ist scharf geworden. Hat BP die Gefahren der Bohrungen von Deepwater Horizon heruntergespielt? Mit anderen Ölmultis Druck noch auf die Obama-Vorgängerregierung ausgeübt, Sicherheitsstandards klein zu halten? Ein ferngesteuerter Sicherheitsschalter jedenfalls, wie etwa in Norwegen vorgeschrieben, ist hierzulande keine Pflicht. Gewaltige Ölreserven liegen im Golf von Mexiko. Sie pumpen Milliarden auch in den US-Haushalt. Auch wenn Obama neue Bohrungen erst einmal ausgesetzt hat, eine Energiewende ist das noch nicht. Erst im März hatte er sie vollzogen und Offshore-Bohrungen wieder erlaubt. 30% unseres heimischen Öls kommen vom Golf. Sollten wir jetzt den Hahn abdrehen, verteidigt der Innenminister, hätte das gewaltige Konsequenzen für die Wirtschaft. So weit wollen die Fischer von Louisiana nicht denken. Sie kämpfen Stunde für Stunde gegen die unaufhaltsame braune Gefahr.
Zu den Folgen der Ölkatastrophe in den USA nun der Kommentar von Stefan Niemann vom Norddeutschen Rundfunk.
Ölverschmierte Tiere, verzweifelte Helfer, hilflose Politiker und ein verlogener Konzern. Es sind die immer gleichen Hauptdarsteller, auch im Umweltdrama an der Südküste der USA. Denn das Desaster im Golf von Mexiko ist nicht nur ein Betriebsunfall im schmutzigen Geschäft mit dem schwarzen Gold. Der tödliche Ölteppich schwimmt in Wahrheit auf einem Ozean aus Profitgier und der Ignoranz einer Supermacht. Die Alleinschuld hat Barack Obama BP gegeben. Der Pächter der gesunkenen Bohrinsel steht am Pranger. Der Multi soll zahlen. BP kann es sich leisten. Rund 6 Milliarden Dollar Gewinn hat der Konzern verbucht im ersten Quartal des Jahres. Trotz fetter Profite war die Technik der Bohrinsel nicht auf dem neuesten Stand. Nur 500.000 US-Dollar kostet ein Ventil, mit dem sich das Leck am Meeresgrund hätte schließen lassen. Aber BP sparte an Sicherheit, was wohl auch auf das Konto des Ölfreundes George W. Bush geht. Denn der hatte zugelassen, dass Lobbyisten strengere Standards verwässern. Es war dann jedoch der selbsternannte Umweltengel und Klimaretter Obama, der auf Druck von Industrie und Opposition grünes Licht für weitere Ölbohrungen vor Amerikas Küste gegeben hatte. Für den Präsidenten ist die Ölpest politisch gefährlich. Für das Land birgt sie eine Chance. Die Amerikaner könnten das Ökodesaster für eine Politikwende nutzen. Die USA brauchen endlich spritsparende Autos, besser gedämmte Häuser und erneuerbare Energien. Wer unabhängiger von fremdem Öl sein will, sollte nicht mehr vor der eigenen Haustür bohren, sondern weniger verbrauchen.
The periods of that ash being encountered. If you're anywhere in that red, there's that potential for you to see it. But as the last check, we looked and parts of Northern Ireland as well as into Ireland, the airspace there is closed, and also to the west of Scotland. So if you're trying to fly into or out of Ireland, you're not going to make it into Scotland, at least not until after 1300 GMT time. We're going to go over and we're going to show you a graphic. This is Flight Radar 24, and if you notice overall, here is Northern Ireland. Notice not a lot happening in the airspace, more over towards the east, across England. You can see especially down towards the south near London, but I expect we'll start to see more planes in the sky as we head throughout the day. Now let me take you back over to our weather graphics. The winds are going to be coming out of the northwest, funneling that ash potentially right through those areas. I think even there's a possibility we could see that sliding over towards the east, affecting parts of Scotland. Of course, we'll keep you up to date if anything changes. Now, we also want to talk about...
Im Anschlag am New Yorker Times Square hat die Polizei einen Verdächtigen festgenommen, einen US-Bürger pakistanischer Herkunft.
Diese Bilder, die Sie jetzt gleich sehen, haben uns vor einigen Momenten erreicht. Und wir sehen hier drauf, wie Ermittler einen Hinterhof und Räume in einer Art Rohbau- oder Abrisshaus nach Spuren durchsuchen. Auch dies soll in Bridgeport sein. Und hier soll sich ebenfalls Al-Shassad aufgehalten haben. Die Bilder kommen aus Connecticut.
Ja, und was wird ihm vorgeworfen? Er soll nämlich das Auto auf dem Platz auf den Times Square gefahren haben.
Hier bei diesem Autohändler im US-Bundesstaat Connecticut hatte der Festgenommene den Nissan Pathfinder gekauft. $1.800 zahlte der 30-jährige Mann in bar. Einen Kaufvertrag wollte er nicht. Möglicherweise sollten so Spuren verwischt werden. Dennoch konnten die Fahnder vom FBI den US-Bürger pakistanischer Herkunft jetzt am JFK-Flughafen von New York festnehmen, als er die USA in Richtung Dubai verlassen wollte. Wir kommen in diesem Fall immer besser voran. Über Einzelheiten kann ich nicht sprechen, denn dann würden wir den Tätern in die Hände spielen, nach denen wir jetzt fahnden. Die Ermittler suchen auch weiter nach dem Mann, den eine Überwachungskamera am Times Square aufgenommen hatte. Laut Polizei ist er zwar kein Verdächtiger mehr, aber er könnte als Zeuge dienen. Das war ein versuchter Terroranschlag auf Amerika. Ob eine oder mehrere Personen dahinter stehen, wissen wir noch nicht. New York sollte auf jeden Fall schlimm getroffen werden. Die Ermittler verfolgen nach dem gescheiterten Autobombenanschlag viele Spuren und offenbar weist inzwischen einiges auf internationale Verbindungen der Hintermänner hin. Die Washington Post schreibt mit Verweis auf Informanten in der Regierung, der Attentatsversuch scheine von mehreren Menschen koordiniert worden zu sein, die Verbindungen ins Ausland hätten. Auch der jetzt Festgenommene soll erst kürzlich von einer Reise aus Pakistan zurückgekehrt sein.
Wir wollen nachfragen bei unserer Kollegin Gesa Eberl, die in New York ist. Gesa, nach dieser Festnahme herrscht da eher Erleichterung vor oder möglicherweise sogar neue Angst wegen eben den eventuellen Verbindungen zu internationalen Extremisten?
Naja, der 30-jährige Faisal Shahzad wurde in der vergangenen Nacht, Ortszeit kurz vor Mitternacht, gefasst. Da ging es zwar bereits durch alle Medien, aber die Reaktion in der Bevölkerung war dann noch relativ schwer auszumachen. Im Moment schläft die Stadt, beziehungsweise die Ersten sind zwar auf den Beinen und man spricht über diese Tat, aber die Leute sind erleichtert, dass natürlich jemand gefunden wurde. Und er wurde ja im letzten Moment gefasst am Flughafen. Er hat ja versucht, das Land Richtung Dubai zu verlassen, wie wir eben gehört haben. Das Flugzeug war anscheinend auch schon auf der Gangway und dann hat man das Flugzeug zurückgeholt, um diesen Mann zu fassen, der heute bereits vor Gericht gestellt werden soll. Und es gibt Nachbarn, die ihn beschreiben als einen sehr angenehmen Mann, der immer gut gekleidet war, der wenig Englisch sprach und anscheinend alle in dem Glauben ließ, dass er an der Wall Street arbeitet. Und finden konnte man ihn letztlich dadurch, dass er erst vor einem Jahr eingebürgert wurde und es dadurch ein Foto gab bei den Behörden, was man dem Autokäufer gezeigt hatte. Und er hat ihn dann wiedererkannt, diesen Mann, der vor 3 Wochen erst den Wagen bei ihm gekauft hatte.
Gesa, wie sieht es eigentlich am Times Square aus, an diesem pulsierenden Platz mitten in New York in den Stunden bzw. jetzt einen Tag danach?
Am Times Square fühlt es sich eigentlich an wie immer. Es war schon immer dort so, dass sehr, sehr, sehr viel Polizei dort herumlief. Denn es ist nun mal der populärste und der größte Platz der Stadt mit fast 40 Theatern. Es ist der Platz, der die Touristen anzieht. Die Einheimischen gehen eigentlich selten dorthin, weil es eben immer so voll ist. Aber im Moment hat man nicht das Gefühl, dass dort tatsächlich vor 2 Tagen eine Katastrophe fast hätte passieren können, wenn nicht ein T-Shirt-Verkäufer darauf aufmerksam geworden wäre, auf dieses Auto. Aber es stehen natürlich viele Fernsehteams herum und man spürt die internationalen Medien.
Und schon wieder eine Aschewolke. Noch sind wir nicht betroffen, aber die Aschewolke stammt wieder von jenem isländischen Vulkan und erneut sind Teile des europäischen Flugverkehrs betroffen.
Irland hat seit heute Morgen 8 Uhr bis zunächst 14 Uhr hieß es ursprünglich, alle Starts und Landungen gestrichen. Und auch Teile von Schottland sind betroffen. Transatlantikverbindungen aus Kontinentaleuropa über Irland nach Amerika müssen aber wegen der größeren Flughöhe, also der höheren Flughöhe, bislang nicht abgesagt werden. Die EU-Verkehrsminister beraten heute über ein besseres Krisenmanagement und auch die wirtschaftlichen Folgen des Vulkanausbruches.
Ja, zufällig also genau, als sich die Minister trafen, passierte das. Und wir wollen nachfragen bei unserer Kollegin von RTL Nord, Anna Huns, die ich in Hamburg begrüße. Hallo. Anna, Sie waren dort, haben gedreht auf Island. Was ist denn noch von dem Vulkan zu spüren zurzeit?
Ich bin ganz ehrlicherweise überrascht, wie groß doch die Auswirkungen vor Ort sind, besonders was die Asche angeht. Als wir angekommen sind dort, sind wir dann auch direkt in einen Ascheregen geraten und diese Asche setzt sich wirklich überall ab, auf dem Gesicht, auf der Kleidung, auf der Windschutzscheibe, sodass man nicht sehen kann und man muss sich die Asche auch vielleicht nicht so vorstellen, wie man das von Zigarettenasche kennt, also pulverig, sondern man merkt ganz klar die Partikel darin, also den Staub, das Glas, die Splitter und auf einer Länge von 20, 30 Kilometern vielleicht südlich des Vulkans ist wirklich alles mit Asche bedeckt. Es gibt keinen Zentimeter, der da noch frei wäre. Die legt sich auf Straßen, auf Felder, auf alles, was man nicht schnell genug nach drinnen schaffen konnte. Und natürlich auch im Norden des Vulkans gab es Auswirkungen. Da waren ja die großen Überschwemmungen, das Wasser stand 1 Meter hoch und vorher waren da grüne, moosbewachsene Lavagesteine und wenn man jetzt da durchfährt, was man nur noch mit einem Jeep kann, dann sieht es tatsächlich aus wie bei einer Mondlandschaft.
Wie gehen denn eigentlich die Menschen mit einem solchen Vulkanausbruch um?
Das ist sehr unterschiedlich. Das ist in zwei Lager geteilt, würde ich sagen. Also auf der einen Seite gibt es da die Menschen, die natürlich Angst haben, besonders die Farmer. Also der Isländer an sich ist eher ein bisschen verschlossen, ein wenig zurückhaltend. Die warten erst mal ab, wenn man vor der Tür steht und was fragen möchte. Aber wenn man dann mit ihnen warm geworden ist, dann fangen sie auch an zu erzählen. Also wir haben eine Farmersfamilie getroffen zum Beispiel, die ganz große Angst hatte, ob sie ihr Vieh wieder nach draußen stellen kann. Die Asche, die dort auf den Feldern liegt, die ist ja giftig und das Vieh frisst das eben gerne, könnte aber daran sterben. Und die wissen vor Ort auch nicht, ob sie vielleicht jemals da wieder Getreide anbauen können. Also die haben wirklich Existenzängste. Und auf der anderen Seite gibt es aber dann auch Leute, die sagen, wir Isländer, wir sind optimistisch, wir mussten schon so oft wieder von vorne anfangen und die glauben ganz fest daran, dass dann doch alles wieder gut wird.
Eindrücke aus Island, besten Dank nach Hamburg, unsere Kollegin Anna Huns.
Welcome back to the iDesk. We're tracking the oil spill across the Gulf of Mexico. Let's bring in Mari Ramos now at the International Weather Center. Mari, how close is it to shore?
You know what, by some estimates right now, we're looking at an area that could be just about 50 kilometers offshore. And by that, we're talking about the thick oil. You heard Reynolds Wolf in the last segment. They're talking about the difference, that you have that very thick crude, the darker spots, and then you have that sheen that kind of washes off a little bit farther, and it's even a little harder to track and see from the satellite images. Now, this is very important because it is that lighter oil, the one that has already reached some areas, including this area right here called the Chandeleur Islands. These islands right here are very sensitive ecologically. They are a wildlife refuge, and those are areas still at risk. Now, something really important to note here, that we're talking about a dozen possible scenarios minimum of where this oil could go. We have a big change in the weather compared to what we had a few days ago. This system is starting to move to the east, as we saw that heavy rain across the southern U.S. in the last few days. So those strong winds out of the south have moved on. But we may see that return, Jonathan, as we head to the latter part of the week. But between now and then, lighter winds could make the situation a little bit better, but a little bit harder to predict as well. Better for people trying to work on the containment, but harder to predict as to where this oil could finally go. Some scenarios even have it moving all the way to the coast of Florida. In other scenarios, you see it pretty much staying where it's at. And in other ones, moving farther to the west, possibly closer to Texas. So there's a lot at stake here and just so many uncertainties. Back to you.
I wonder if you've had a chance to steer your radar far to the north and east to Iceland, because once again, we're talking about the volcano grounding flights. What are you seeing?
You know what? This is really interesting because these two scenarios are kind of similar. When we talk about the ash plume, it's kind of the same thing. There are so many variables that come into play as well when you're trying to predict where this ash plume is going to go. You have to take into account how much ash is in the air, where the air mass is, the air temperature, the content of the ash plume. And with the oil, it's kind of the same thing. How much oil is in the water temperature, what the weather's doing, what the currents are doing. So there's so many variables when it comes to both of these predictions. But we do have some ideas, of course, and there's a lot of experts that are working on this. The volcanic ash concentration, Eurocontrol sent out this earlier today. The volcano has not stopped erupting. It hasn't had major eruptions like the ones that we saw before, and the ash plume had not gone up into the atmosphere. But now we did see this larger eruption, and the ash cloud did reach to about 20,000 feet. That's why we had those grounding of flights earlier across portions of Ireland. Flying over these areas was okay. If we see another eruption, at least in the next day or so, it looks like the winds will be in our favor. And in other words, it should move it away from this area at least a little bit. It won't be a direct shot like what we had a few weeks ago.
I know you'll be tracking that for us. Mara Ramos at the Weather Center. Thanks very much. 3 days after a bomb plot was thwarted in Times Square, a suspect is to appear in court. We'll have the latest on the investigation, including leads police are pursuing outside of New York City. And police suspect Faisal Shahzad was plotting a deadly attack. BP says it's throwing every available resource at the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. That's done nothing to quiet the second guessing. You're at the International Desk. You're at the International Desk. Welcome back. I'm Jonathan Mann. In just a few hours, a suspect in the Times Square bomb plot will appear in a New York courtroom. This is Faisal Shahzad, the man police suspect of driving the car with the bomb into the heart of New York. Sources tell CNN that Shahzad has already told investigators he was acting alone. Police are now pursuing leads in Connecticut, where Shahzad once lived. They're also scanning his application for U.S. citizenship. Shahzad was born in Pakistan, but was naturalized as a U.S. citizen last year. Jason Carroll is standing outside the New York courthouse where Shahzad is scheduled to appear in just a few hours and joins us now. Jason, what's going to happen to him in there?
Well, what's going to happen during this initial appearance will be the charges will be read against him. He's expected to appear with U.S. District Court Judge Kevin Fox. We're hearing that that's expected to happen at about 2 o'clock Eastern Time. During this initial appearance, in addition to the charges, Jonathan, the judge will determine whether or not bail should be set in this particular case. Does not seem likely given the severity of the allegations. Jonathan?
This has happened very fast. The bomb was placed Saturday night. Monday night, he was already under arrest. How did they catch him so quickly?
I think what you're going to end up seeing here, Jonathan, is when you look at this car, the vehicle, the Nissan Pathfinder. That was key to this investigation. The Nissan Pathfinder this alleged suspect bought this car. This is the same vehicle that was used in the failed Times Square bombing plot. So once investigators had their hands on this car, they could use it to circle back, if you will, to the original owner. Then they could go to the original owner, talk to the original owner about who they were able to sell it to. They already had a picture of this man because, as you say, he was naturalized as a U.S. citizen last April. So they already had a picture of him in their system. So when they went to this to the seller of this vehicle, they were able to go in hand with at least something, a picture, and say, is this the man that sold you this particular car? So the car was key to their investigation.
Okay, the car is how he got into New York. He was taking a plane out of New York when he was arrested. How close was he to actually making that flight and getting away? Do we know?
Well, you know, we are hearing from investigators who say that he was extremely close in terms of getting it away. You know, this morning we heard reports on both sides. The latest report that we're hearing is that he was very, very close. In fact, he was heading to the airport. Investigators, were working with the airline to try and determine exactly what flight he was on, trying to get all of those details worked out. That is why you hear the detail that the plane had actually pulled away from the gate. You know, they had stopped the plane, then turned it around, brought it back then so investigators could go in and make their erase. It was very close.
Jason Carroll live at the courthouse. Thanks very much. Let's bring in senior international correspondent Nick Robertson for some perspective on all of this. Joining us now on the line from London. Nick, what kinds of conclusions are experts drawing from what we know so far about this?
Well, they'll be looking at a number of things. One is the makeup of the bomb. It's not as sophisticated as we've seen al-Qaeda use in the past. They'll be looking at the man's background. They'll be looking at his recent trips to Pakistan, which do seem to hold the same sort of profile as we've seen with attackers in London and people who've wanted to and planned and plotted attacks in the United States. That is a trip to Pakistan, sometimes to get training, sometimes just getting radicalized, and then coming back and making an active effort within a relatively short space of time to put together a plot. So they're going to be looking at those things. Who was he talking to in the United States? Was there a small group of them? And perhaps more importantly, what happened when this newly, if you will, minted American citizen goes back to Pakistan? Al-Qaeda, as we know, cherish and prize people like him who have no previous record or convictions, who have American passports, who know the United States well, and if they can convince them to perpetrate an attack within the United States, that is the perfect type of person for them. There's no indication yet that this man falls into that category, but these are the sorts of things we can expect investigators to be looking at here, Jonathan.
And yet, the overwhelming impression you get is that this man was a rank amateur. The fertilizer he used in the bomb wouldn't explode. The bomb itself wouldn't go off. He bought his plane ticket apparently with cash, which set off alarm signals among the people who sold him the ticket. Are dangerous people usually this bad at what they're doing?
We don't know at the moment how close his homemade bomb came to going off. We do know that the sorts of people who self-radicalize, the sorts of people who've been caught in the United States and have attempted plots in other parts of the world, sometimes are not the smartest people. But for anyone setting them off on this path or just infusing them with this kind of idea of sort of global jihadism, that the United States is against Muslims and therefore you should attack the United States, which is the general sort of preposition that's sold to these young people, is something that does not turn away people who are not technically experienced or good. And it's certainly a worry for counterterrorism experts. We've seen it in the United Kingdom with the attempt or an attack on Glasgow Airport, an attempt on an attack in a nightclub district of London a couple of days before, that even what we might call rank amateurs are able to put together things that could be potentially deadly. Now imagine a different scenario, and imagine that the bomb, that vehicle did explode. And would investigators have been able to get so quickly to the information that pinpointed this particular man before he fled the country? Potentially, yes, but potentially evidence would have been lost in that vehicle, which would have lost time for the investigators. So were we lucky because it didn't go off? Was he unlucky because it didn't go off and it led to his very quick capture? But there's no doubt about it, he seems to have thrown everything into the mix. Fertilizer bombs are not necessarily easy to make. They degrade over time if they're not used quickly, if they're not mixed properly. Fireworks to initiate another set of explosions. Potentially this seems to be the indication here. That's not very much out of the sort of al-Qaeda playbook. But counterterrorism officials recognize that al-Qaeda might be changing its playbook and saying, look, we cannot go with high-profile attacks because they keep getting disrupted and keep getting interrupted. What can get through? The lone guy, the one or two people who are able to put together something that just gives us some kind of bang, some kind of mini-spectacular in the center of New York, which, as counterterrorism officials know, is still top prize, top target for al-Qaeda, Jonathan.
Nick Robertson in London, thanks very much. Back now to the disaster that's unfolding in the Gulf of Mexico. It was 2 weeks ago that an oil rig blew up and sank, leaving thousands of barrels of oil gushing into the water each day. Well owner BP is working on a dome that it hopes to lower over the leak and capture most of the flowing oil. Meanwhile, in Washington, lawmakers are set to meet with environmentalists on Capitol Hill. That's in just half an hour. They'll assess the crisis and hammer out a plan for moving forward. 2 congressmen have called for hearings on the accident, and as Gary Tuckman reports, the Court of Public Opinion is already in session.
On the Gulf Coast, BP is increasingly a dirty word.
I was for the drilling, but with all this, I don't know.
According to lawyers, hundreds of Louisiana residents ready to start cleanup work signed a BP document that was passed around, waiving any claims against the company if they were hurt while doing the work for BP. Immediately, concerns were raised that BP was trying to buy people off. Jim Click is an attorney representing a group of fishermen.
He requested that these releases be removed and that they give us back all those releases, that this was outrageous.
The company made a statement saying any such documents will be rescinded and not binding on anyone signing same. Meanwhile, other complaints about this petroleum giant. Roxana Boris and her husband own a marine construction company.
Business is good?
Yes, it is.
What can this oil do to your business?
It could devastate us.
So her company, which does dredging, installs bulkheads, and builds mooring for boats, has made an offer to BP and to state officials. She will provide cranes, barges, tugboats, and other boats to help in the battle to keep the oil away from shore.
What is BP? What is the Coast Guard? What are the state authorities saying to you?
I can't get anybody to answer me.
Roxana Boris is incredulous that no one is calling her back. She also runs a large live bait operation that could offer sanctuary to sea animals, too.
It's very frustrating to know that you have means to help and you feel absolutely helpless because you cannot get any response from anybody.
The next few hours could literally determine the future of Roxana Boris's livelihood. She waits for a phone call from the people in charge of this cleanup. She waits for the possibility of the oil flowing into this river. She desperately hopes the phone call comes first.
Time is undoubtedly running short. Gary Tuckman, CNN, Pascagoula, Mississippi.
Im Südosten der USA ist die Zahl der Todesopfer nach den schweren Unwettern auf mindestens 27 gestiegen. In den Bundesstaaten Kentucky und Tennessee mussten sich tausende Menschen vor den Fluten in Sicherheit bringen. Straßen wurden überschwemmt, ganze Ortschaften stehen unter Wasser. Viele Autofahrer wurden von den Fluten eingeschlossen und mussten befreit werden. Der Vulkanausbruch auf Island macht Flugpassagieren wieder zu schaffen. Wegen einer neuen Aschewolke mussten in Irland, Nordirland und in einigen Regionen Schottlands alle Flughäfen geschlossen werden. Nach 6 Stunden gaben die Behörden den Luftraum wieder frei. Der isländische Gletschervulkan ist nach wie vor aktiv. Meteorologen warnen davor, dass anhaltende nördliche Winde für mehr Asche und damit für weitere Behinderungen in Großbritannien sorgen könnten. Und wie soll mit solchen Situationen künftig umgegangen werden? Darüber haben die europäischen Verkehrsminister in Brüssel beraten. Als Konsequenz aus dem Flugchaos beschlossen sie unter anderem die Einführung einheitlicher Grenzwerte.
Der Stuhl des irischen Verkehrsministers blieb heute in Brüssel leer. Wegen der Aschewolke musste sein Flugzeug in Dublin am Boden bleiben. Die neue Wolke erhöhte den Druck auf die Minister, gemeinsam zu handeln. Vulkane halten sich leider nicht an irgendwelche Regeln. Deshalb müssen wir schnell und flexibel reagieren. Die Minister beschlossen, für alle Fluggesellschaften bindende Grenzwerte zu erarbeiten. Ein Chaos auf den Flughäfen wie vor 2,5 Wochen soll künftig vermieden werden.
Wir haben uns verpflichtet, uns einheitlichen Regelungen definitiv zu unterwerfen. Und wir haben diese einheitlichen Regelungen auch unterfüttert mit einheitlichen Messmethoden und einheitlichen Grenzwerten im Hinblick auf die Frage, was Flugzeuge und Triebwerke sicher verkraften.
Künftig gelten für ganz Europa einheitliche Messmethoden, damit nicht jedes Land, wie zuletzt, willkürlich über Starts und Landungen entscheidet. Ein präziser Wert, ab welcher Aschekonzentration nicht mehr geflogen werden darf, wird festgeschrieben.
Was wir brauchen, ist verbesserte Koordination. Was wir brauchen, ist, dass man nicht nur über einen einheitlichen europäischen Luftraum redet, sondern diesen auch umsetzt.
Finanzspritzen für Umsatzausfälle der Fluglinien soll es nicht geben. Doch über Entschädigungen für gestrandete Passagiere wollen die Verkehrsminister im Juni beraten.
Ostküste Floridas aus fliegen wir über das offene Meer. Der starke Wind der letzten Tage hat das Öl noch von der Küste ferngehalten. Aber an den kleinen Sandbänken und Inseln ist der braune Schlick schon angekommen. Auch im tieferen Wasser erkenne ich dunkle, ölverfärbte Bereiche. Und immer wieder entdecken wir Fischerboote, die schwimmende Barrieren bauen.
Man sieht hier Schlieren und dunkle Stellen im Meer, so schlammig grau. Der Wind der letzten Tage hat das Öl eben auf der ganzen Fläche verteilt. Und es ist schon eine beängstigende Vorstellung, dass hier weiterhin bis zu 1 Million Liter am Tag unter Wasser ins Meer laufen.
Diese Luftbilder einer norwegischen Umweltschutzorganisation zeigen, wie Flugzeuge Chemikalien versprühen, um den Ölteppich aufzulösen. Außerdem zeigen sie die neue Plattform, von der Entlastungsbohrungen durchgeführt werden, um der Ölquelle den Druck zu nehmen. Mittlerweile soll es dem Ölkonzern BP gelungen sein, das kleinste der Lecks zu schließen, was jedoch keinen entscheidenden Rückgang des ausströmenden Öls bedeutet. Eine Stahlglocke soll jetzt aufs Meer hinausgeschleppt werden. BP will sie dort, wo die brennende Deepwater Horizon gesunken ist, über die Lecks am Meeresgrund stülpen.
4 Stockwerke hoch, 100 Tonnen schwer. Die soll das Öl dort unten auffangen, zumindest 80% davon nach oben leiten und dann soll es mit Tankschiffen wegtransportiert werden.
Noch besteht dieser schwarze Schlick hier nur aus ölverschmierten Algen. Es gibt nur vereinzelt schon verklebte Tiere wie diesen Pelikan. Aber es ist wohl nur noch eine Frage der Zeit, bis die schwarze Pest endgültig die strahlend weißen Strände erreicht hat.
Und gleich bei uns in der Sendung Schrecksekunde für die niederländische Königsfamilie. Bei einer Gedenkfeier mit mehreren tausend Teilnehmern in Amsterdam bricht eine Massenpanik aus. Dutzende Menschen werden niedergetrampelt. Dazu ein vierter Mann hat gestern Abend in Amsterdam bei einer Gedenkfeier für die niederländischen Kriegstoten eine Massenpanik ausgelöst. Dutzende Menschen wurden niedergetrampelt. Mitten im Chaos die Königsfamilie.
Es ist kurz nach 8 Uhr abends. Tausende Menschen, darunter auch die königliche Familie, halten inne im Gedenken an die niederländischen Opfer der Kriege. Mitten in die Stille hinein hallen plötzlich Schreie. Sofort bricht unter den Menschen Panik aus. In einer Luftaufnahme ist gut zu erkennen, dort wo die Schreie herkommen, setzt sich die Menge zuerst in Bewegung, Sekunden später auch auf der anderen Seite des Platzes. Angst spiegelt sich auch in den Augen von Prinzessin Máxima wider. Königin Beatrix wird von einem Leibwächter weggebracht. Die Massen sind einfach über mich drüber gerannt, sagt dieses Mädchen. Mehr als 60 Menschen werden verletzt. Die Bilder erinnern an die Panik während des Königinnentages im letzten Jahr. Ein Amokfahrer raste damals durch die Menge auf den Festbus der königlichen Familie zu. 8 Menschen starben zum Entsetzen des Thronfolgerpaares. Die Polizei in Amsterdam nahm nach der Panik einen geistig verwirrten, vorbestraften Mann fest. Er hatte mit seinen Schreien die Panik ausgelöst. Nachdem sich die Massen wieder beruhigt hatten, zeigte Königin Beatrix Nervenstärke und kehrte zu der Gedenkfeier zurück.
Eyjafjalla in Island spuckt wieder mehr Asche. Nun drohen dem Flugverkehr über Europa neue Behinderungen. Die Flugsicherung Eurocontrol rechnet damit, dass sich die betroffene Zone schnell bis zum Westen Spaniens ausweiten könnte. Schon jetzt müssen Transatlantikflüge weiträumig um den irischen Luftraum umgeleitet werden.
In einem noch nie dagewesenen Experiment versuchen Ingenieure seit einigen Stunden in 1600 Metern Tiefe das Leck am Meeresboden mit einer Stahlglocke abzudichten. Seit dem Untergang einer Bohrinsel vor 2 Wochen strömt dort ungehindert Rohöl ins Meer. Aus den USA, Ulrich Oppold.
Der giftige Ölschlick hat inzwischen die unbewohnte Chandelier-Inselgruppe vor der Küste südlich von New Orleans erreicht. Hier schwappt die braune Brühe an den Strand eines Naturschutzgebietes. Alle Hoffnung ruht nun auf der 100 Tonnen schweren Metallglocke, die über die Lecks auf dem Meeresgrund gestülpt werden soll. Ein Kran hat die Konstruktion in der Nacht von Bord eines Frachters gehoben und ins Wasser gelassen. Das Absenken der Schutzglocke soll schon in den nächsten Stunden abgeschlossen sein. Bisher wurde noch nie versucht, ausfließendes Öl in 1600 Metern Tiefe abzufangen. Die Unterwasserströmung erschwert es, den Stahlkoloss konstant in Position zu halten und exakt über dem Leck zu platzieren. Die Ingenieure müssen außerdem verhindern, dass das ausströmende Öl verklumpt. Denn es kommt kochend heiß mit 100 Grad Celsius aus dem Boden. Das Wasser in der Umgebung ist nur 5 Grad kalt. Damit das Öl nicht sofort verklumpt und in der Pipeline stecken bleibt, wird Methanol eingepumpt, um es mindestens 50 Grad heiß und damit flüssig zu halten. Mit Kameras und Scheinwerfern ausgerüstete U-Boote installieren in absoluter Dunkelheit eine Rohrleitung aus Stahl, die zu einem Tankschiff an der Wasseroberfläche führt. Die Techniker kämpfen ständig gegen die Gefahr, dass sich das Öl-, Wasser- und Gasgemisch an Bord des Tankers entzündet. Wenn alles gut geht, wird ab Montag das ausströmende Öl von dem Tanker aufgefangen. Inzwischen wird weiteres Öl auf der Wasseroberfläche abgefackelt. Flugzeuge versprühen Chemikalien, die den Ölfilm auflösen. Und auch Fischerboote helfen dabei, die giftige Brühe abzusaugen im Kampf gegen die Umweltkatastrophe am Golf von Mexiko.
Well, at least 54 people were killed when violent thunderstorms lashed parts of north and eastern India. The storms ripped through Bihar and Uttar Pradesh Friday, destroying homes and downing power lines. Dozens were injured. Many of the deaths were blamed on lightning strikes and falling trees. In Bihar, raging winds even overturned a bus. A giant volcanic ash cloud has now forced 19 airports to close across Spain, including the country's busiest hub in Barcelona. Hundreds of flights have been cancelled. The ash is coming from the same volcano in Iceland that disrupted travel for days last month. So no doubt travellers are fervently hoping the air will clear sometime soon. And meteorologist Ebony Dion is tracking the ash cloud. She joins us now from the International Weather Centre. So whereabouts is it now? Where's it heading?
Well, it's going to continue to make its way eastward across northern areas of Spain, possibly reaching as far east as Marseille, so certainly something to watch. Airports here across southern areas of France have also been impacted, as well as airports across northern Portugal. We've been continuing to watch the explosive activity, although it has decreased some. That plume is still getting up to about 6 to about 8 kilometers up into the air, but you can see it pushing a little further east, and then it moves out and away from the UK, which is good news for now. But then as you get south, it streams right across the northern areas of Spain, which is impacting the airports now. Now let's get a look at a picture from NASA, and you can see that plume, and it looks like it's directing its way right towards the UK, but that has not been the case as of yet. That could change, unfortunately, as we're going to watch the jet stream pattern shift just a little bit. Right now it's driving it southward, and that's what's causing the problems over Spain. But take a look at what happens. The branch of the jet stream could dip down a little bit further southward, and as it does, well, that could bring some of that ash across the UK and then over towards Scandinavia. This is Sunday on into Monday, so certainly an area to watch for the end of the weekend. Rosemary?
All right, thanks so much, Ebony. Appreciate it. I want to shift our focus now to the massive oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. And BP says a giant containment dome is in position over the oil leak. Engineers are now focused on getting it secured in place on the sea floor. And BP says the dome could be up and running by early next week. Now, meanwhile, thousands of barrels of oil are still gushing into the sea. And Brooke Baldwin went out to check on that slick a little earlier. She joins me now with the latest from Biloxi, Mississippi. And yeah, you went out on that 8-hour boat trip. You had those great underwater shots and also that sample too.
Right. Rosemary, you were the first person I called right in to talk to you after we got off the boat, and we sort of seized upon this amazing opportunity not only to see the water, the oil in the water from boat level, but I had this teeny tiny camera that we brought along with us, and it may be teeny tiny, but it really tells a huge story. We were able to take a look at some of the pictures, what the oil and what some of the dispersant looks like about 18 inches below the surface of the water. And I'm no expert, so I grabbed an expert, a marine scientist who's with the Scripps Institute of Oceanography out in California. He's a co-founder of the website belowthesurface.org. And I asked him, as we started looking at some of the underwater video, what we were looking at and how damaging it may be. Take a listen. Are you surprised it's broken up the way it is?
I really am. This is the first underwater footage I've seen of this particular spill with the dispersant applied. So the fact that it's sinking now and covering a larger area is, I think, is much of a problem.
Do the fish then eat the pieces of oil? The pelicans eat the fish? I mean, how? Connect it for me.
The base of the marine food web are actually microscopic plankton, and those are the first ones to get hit. They're incredibly sensitive to this impact. So once they're gone, that just goes up the food chain. And once a lot of fish actually feed off plankton, even whales. So it's something that is incredibly harmful to the marine environment.
So even though they're out there and they're working hard on containing that leak, this damage, would you say it's done?
Damage is done, and it's continuing.
500 Metern Tiefe in Finsternis und mit ferngesteuerten Robotern. So beschreibt BP die Rettungsaktion im Golf von Mexiko. Dort haben Experten die 100 Tonnen schwere Stahlkuppel jetzt über dem sprudelnden Bohrloch in Position gebracht. Wenn alles gut geht, könnte die Kuppel bis zu 85% des ausströmenden Öls auffangen.
Noch immer drücken Millionen Liter Öl an die Oberfläche, noch immer schiebt sich die tödliche Brühe auf die Strände von 4 US-Bundesstaaten zu. Die Stahlkuppel, die mindestens eines der Lecks der geborstenen Bohrstelle abdichten soll, wurde in der Nacht abgesenkt. Strömung und Wasserdruck trotzend sitzt der 100-Tonnen-Koloss präzise. Das Problem ist damit aber noch lange nicht gelöst. Jetzt muss die Verbindung angepasst werden, die ein Abpumpen des Öls auf Schiffe ermöglichen soll. Die Unterwasserkamera zeigt den Druck, der dazu gebändigt werden muss. BP ist denn auch nur verhalten optimistisch. Jetzt, wo die Kuppel platziert ist, müssen wir an das sogenannte Feintuning gehen. Alles muss am Meeresgrund fixiert werden und dann kann das Öl abgepumpt werden. Bis Montag soll diese Feinarbeit noch dauern. 2/3 des Ölflusses will man dann unter Kontrolle haben. Heftig diskutiert wird die Sinnhaftigkeit dieser Prozedur. Der Ölteppich wird mit Chemikalien besprüht, um ihn aufzulösen und in Partikeln auf den Meeresgrund sinken zu lassen. Von den eingesetzten Chemikalien ist nur eines bekannt, sie sind hochgiftig, genau wie das Öl. Welche Auswirkungen diese Potenzierung von Gift auf die Nahrungskette von Meeresbewohnern und Seevögeln hat, ist völlig offen. Wenn die Tiere mit Öl in Kontakt kommen, wird es nicht nur diese Pelikane töten, sondern auch noch die nächste Generation. Die Küstenwache fackelte auch heute wieder größere Ölflächen ab. Gleich nebenan wird weiter gefördert. Der Genehmigungsstopp für Ölbohrungen betrifft ausschließlich Neuerschließungen.
Der isländische Gletschervulkan spuckt weiter Asche in die Atmosphäre und der Wind treibt die Aschewolke auf den europäischen Kontinent. Mit bekannten Konsequenzen für den Flugverkehr, vor allem in Portugal, Südfrankreich und Spanien mussten mehr als 600 Flüge abgesagt werden. Mehrere Flughäfen wurden geschlossen. Auch von Frankfurt aus konnten einige Maschinen Richtung Spanien nicht starten. Am Frankfurter Flughafen hat heute aber der Bau von 2 Flugzeugbrücken begonnen. Maschinen, die künftig auf der neuen Nordwestlandebahn aufsetzen, sollen über diese Brücken zu den Terminals rollen, hinweg über die ICE-Trasse und die Autobahn. Die A3 in Richtung Würzburg ist deshalb mehrere Nächte lang gesperrt.
Knapp 100 Tonnen setzen sich hier in Bewegung. Einer der beiden Schwerlastkräne, die später die Brückenbauteile für die neue Landebahn heben sollen. Das ist der Moment, auf den Projektleiter Horst Ammann und sein Team monatelang hingearbeitet haben.
Er ist ein entscheidender Tag, was den Terminplan betrifft. Deshalb sind wir froh, dass es jetzt und heute geschieht. Und jetzt warten wir einfach ab, wie es geht. Ich gehe mal davon aus, dass es funktioniert. Aber spannend bleibt's.
Das Megaprojekt lässt sich tagsüber, wenn Hunderttausende Autos auf der A3 unterwegs sind, nicht durchführen. Die Kräne müssen mitten auf die Fahrbahn. Insgesamt 100 Mann sind im Einsatz, um die Brückenträger, hergestellt in der Oberpfalz, einzusetzen. Rund 90 Tonnen wiegt ein solcher Betonklotz, innen verstärkt mit Stahl. Schließlich sollen ab Herbst 2011 Flugzeuge darüber rollen und die Passagiere von der Landebahn über die A3 zu den Terminals bringen. Der Flughafenbetreiber Fraport ist mit Beginn des Brückenbaus seinem Ziel wieder ein Stück näher gekommen.
Mit der neuen Landebahn können wir die Kapazitäten erhöhen von 80 Bewegungen pro Stunde auf 120 Bewegungen pro Stunde. Das heißt plus 50%. Wir können mehr Ziele in die Region anbieten. Wir können damit natürlich auch Arbeitsplätze hier schaffen. Es können sich mehr Unternehmen hier ansiedeln und das ist das Wichtige für diese Region.
Insgesamt werden für die neuen Flugzeugbrücken 400 Teile verlegt, davon 280 in den ersten 10 Nächten. Für die anderen Segmente wird die A3 ab 7. Juni gesperrt, dann aber auf der Gegenfahrbahn.
Box designed to contain the escaping oil has had to be moved after it became clogged up with ice crystals. Engineers are trying to solve the problem so they can place the box back over the leak.
50 miles offshore in the Gulf of Mexico, oil covers the sea. These BBC pictures show a patchwork of thick orange streaks and BP's fleet of ships trying to contain it. They're failing. BP lowered this giant container to the seabed. It was supposed to sit tightly over the leak, but ice-like crystals or hydrates formed on it, making it unstable. It's a setback.
I wouldn't say it's failed yet. What I would say is what we attempted to do last night didn't work because these hydrates plugged up the top of the dome. What we're currently doing and expect it'll probably take the next 48 hours or so is seeing, is there a way to overcome this problem? We did anticipate hydrates being a problem, but not this significant.
Meanwhile, at a tourist spot close to the mainland, there's an oil scare.
Took a short walk down the beach, and within 15 minutes, here we found this. And we took it to the official.
You can see why this is one of Alabama's most popular beaches, and it was here that a handful of tar balls were found, small black blobs. They're being tested, but the Coast Guard thinks they came from the spill. And as you can see right now, they're taking no chances. Now teams are laying coastal defences here, designed to soak up any more oil that might reach this shore. And it seems everyone wants to help. At this rally in New Orleans, they remember the devastation of Hurricane Katrina and hope the oil is gone before storm season arrives.
You got 3 months, you're in hurricane season, you get a depression. You don't need a hurricane. You get a depression, give me 4-foot storm tides, that stuff is going over the marsh and it's going further in. And it's going to kill trees and everything else. Oil kills everything.
Tourism and fishing industries are already counting the cost. Communities that depend on the coast bracing as the oil edges closer. Rajesh Merchandani, BBC News in Alabama.
Tapping that oil leak some 5,000 feet below the surface. Another concern, according to a marine scientist I spoke with, is what lies just below the surface of the water. We showed Christian Gustafson with the Scripps Institute of Oceanography our video that we captured just under this oil sheen, and his concern isn't just the oil, but the chemical dispersants used to break it up. Listen.
This is likely due to the application of dispersants, which are widely believed to be just as toxic as the oil itself. Another concern is that it breaks up the oil and it spreads it over a larger surface area. So instead of having a concentrated amount of crude, you've got a widespread solution of oil and the dispersant.
Now, the damage to the ecosystem and the economy here along the Gulf Coast is still unknown, and perhaps that's one of the reasons why we're seeing so many people out at the beach today or fishing off this pier, because if the oil comes on shore, this may be one of the last opportunities they've got. Brooke Baldwin, CNN, Biloxi, Mississippi.
So those residents want to know when they can head out, or at least for how long they'll be able to enjoy the beach. Our Ivan Cabrera is at our International Weather Center covering everything. What are you seeing, Ivan? Because now, as this has moved into another week, residents are still unsure of the impact it will have once it arrives.
Well, I mean, we're all still unsure. I'm still unsure. I don't think any of us can really talk about the breadth and the scope of what this has the potential of becoming if we don't cap that well. And I don't like the news coming out of there as far as those problems that they're encountering there. Hopefully they'll be able to overcome that and get that dome to work so that we don't have to depend on that relief well that is being drilled. That'll take 2 to 3 months. That dome could get to work immediately and help us out with this. And these pictures that we've been getting from space, this is that oil slick out in the Gulf of Mexico. Just incredible pictures that we can see from space and give us an idea of where the oil slick is, and that allows our computer models to forecast where it is going. But it is only a view from space. We need to actually dissect and x-ray that oil, and we can do that with, in fact, thermal imaging. This is what they've been, again, at this point, all hands on deck. We're using all the technology we have to be able to not only skim the oil, burn the oil, and disperse the oil with those dispersants, but also get that data in from the thermal imaging, which basically, Errol, allows us not only to see how big the oil spill is, but how deep it is, and that depth is important for those skimmer boats to be able to work efficiently out there. So again, we are talking about all the technology being put to use, and hopefully we will contain it in a short time, because I'm telling you what, in just the last 24 hours, we've spilled another 5,000 barrels. By the time I see you tomorrow, we would have done that again, and we're going to continue to do that. That's the minimum that we're going to be spilling here. We could be increasing that. The winds are not going to be a problem. The wind speeds, I don't think, are going to be a problem. So our oil slick will do what it's going to do. We have a lot of uncertainty here. The Delta could be impacted. Of course, the barrier islands here have already been impacted, and we'll continue to monitor those areas for potential risks for days and perhaps even weeks to come. We'll keep you posted on that dome. Hopefully we'll be able to get that up and running soon.
All right. Ivan, thanks very much.
Es ist 18:45 Uhr am Wahlsonntagabend. Hier sind die Nachrichten bei RTL. Wahlkrimi in Nordrhein-Westfalen. Die CDU stürzt ab, Schwarz-Gelb ist abgewählt. Die SPD wird trotz Verlusten wohl die stärkste Kraft. Die Regierungskoalition ist noch offen, doch Rot-Grün hat eine Chance. Neue Aschewolke. Die Flugsicherung sperrt wieder den Luftraum über Süddeutschland.
Jetzt hat es auch wieder den deutschen Luftraum getroffen. Die Staubwolke des isländischen Vulkans Eyjafjallajökull hat sich von Spanien weiter über Norditalien bis nach Deutschland ausgebreitet. Der Flughafen München wurde heute vorübergehend gesperrt. Auch in Frankfurt fielen Dutzende Flüge aus. In Spanien hat sich die Lage hingegen normalisiert. Dort hatte die Asche gestern den Flugverkehr behindert. Herber Rückschlag. Bei der Ölkatastrophe im Golf von Mexiko gibt es neue Komplikationen. Erst gestern wurde eine gigantische Stahlglocke auf dem Ozeangrund installiert, um ein Bohrloch zu verschließen. Heute musste die Glocke wieder entfernt werden. Der Grund: es haben sich Eiskristalle gebildet, die nun die Leitungen verstopfen, durch die eigentlich das Öl abgepumpt werden sollte. Nun fließt das Öl wieder in gigantischen Mengen direkt ins Meer. Die Behebung des Problems dauert mindestens 2 Tage.
Während das Öl draußen auf dem Meer abgefackelt wird, versuchen hunderte Helfer, die Ausläufer am Strand von Dolphin Island abzufangen. Hier schwappt immer mehr Öl an Land, eine Gefahr für die Badegäste.
Wie wir erfuhren, stritten Katastrophenzentrale und Kommune darüber, ob dieser gesamte Bereich gesperrt werden sollte. Vorerst hat sich die Stadt durchgesetzt. Das Badevergnügen geht erst einmal weiter.
Unterdessen sucht der Ölkonzern BP weiter nach Möglichkeiten, das Ausströmen des Öls zu stoppen. Denn auch diese 100 Tonnen schwere Stahlkuppel half nichts. Als die Einsatzkräfte sie über das Leck gestülpt hatten, bildeten sich an der Innenseite Kristalle aus Öl und Wasser. Schuld war die Kälte am Meeresgrund. Die Kuppel musste wieder entfernt werden. Es fließen also weiter jeden Tag rund 700 Liter Rohöl ins Meer. Wie viele Tiere bereits verendet sind, ist nicht abzuschätzen. Diesen Pelikan fanden Tierschützer noch gerade rechtzeitig. Er konnte vom Öl befreit werden.
Weitere Meldungen haben wir kurz in einem Überblick für Sie zusammengefasst.
Beweise. Die USA sind sich offenbar sicher, dass Taliban-Kämpfer in Pakistan als Drahtzieher hinter dem versuchten Bombenanschlag auf dem Times Square in New York stecken. Der geständige Täter Faisal Shahzad soll unter Anleitung der Terrorgruppe Tehrik-e-Taliban gearbeitet haben. Laut US-Geheimdienst ist es der erste Terroranschlag der Gruppe in den USA.
Details dürfen nicht bekannt werden, nur sie sind vor Gericht verwertbar. Stattdessen Ablenkungsmanöver, Selbstbeweihräucherung. Jetzt ist nicht die Zeit, mit Fingern auf irgendwen zu zeigen. Jetzt konzentrieren wir uns auf die Rettungsarbeiten.
Wenn ich während der Krise voreilig Informationen über die Ursachen einer Krise öffentlich kommuniziere, muss ich damit rechnen, dass diese Informationen wenig später Eingang in ein Gerichtsverfahren finden, das gegen mein Unternehmen geführt wird, und muss damit rechnen, dass genau diese Informationen am Ende Schadensersatzforderungen auslösen können, die insbesondere bei Massenklagen oder bei Verfahren in den USA häufig in den Millionen- oder Milliardenbereich gehen können.
Die Angst vor gigantischen Schadenersatzzahlungen, deshalb schweigt BP. Stattdessen präsentiert man Bilder von der Rettungsglocke. Kamerateams aus aller Welt sind dabei. Jedes kleinste Detail wird kommuniziert.
Hier geht es gezielt einfach auch darum, von den eigentlichen Fragen abzulenken, beispielsweise den konkreten Ursachen dieses Desasters. Und wer spricht heute noch über die 11 Toten?
Die Ursache der Katastrophe. Von BP werden die Menschen sie wohl nicht erfahren. Dafür geht es um zu viel Geld.
Now, no solution is working yet. The oil is still leaking. Where's the slick moving now? Mari Ramos joins us with more from the International Weather Center. Mari.
Hey, yeah, that was a great report from Colleen. Really explains everything that's going on. You know what, Christy? The question is where it's going to go. Where is this oil slick going to be moving to? And the concern is that it will get closer to land. Now, we're going to see some problems with the weather in the next couple of days. I want to show you this picture. I call it double boom because that's what they're using. Look, 1, 2. This is the kind of protection that they're using over the water to try to prevent the oil from reaching protected areas like this one of the New Harbor Islands in Louisiana. When we begin to see the weather pick up like we are expecting to happen in the next 24 hours, the uncertainty of where the oil is going to go continues to grow. We're still thinking it's going to be in these areas closer to Louisiana and maybe a little bit more toward the west. Unfortunately, the weather will be very rough in some cases, winds up to 40 kilometers per hour, waves maybe up to 2 meters in some cases, and that will make things very difficult. They won't be able to do any kind of burning of the oil or anything like that, and it makes it more difficult for the booms to actually hold. So these are huge areas that are still potentially at risk here. The same weather system that caused all those tornadoes, and we're going to talk about that in the next hour, is the front that will be stretching along the Gulf of Mexico. You can begin to see it here at the edge of Texas, and as this continues to move along, that's when the winds will pick up more out of the south throughout the day today. So definitely something to monitor. And I want to take you to another part of the world very quickly, Christy. Look at this picture. This is a picture of beached oil in Bhubaneswar in the Bay of Bengal in India. This a much smaller spill, but still devastating nonetheless, as you can see here. This is where olive riley turtles actually nest, and they're an endangered species. This happened because 2 ships collided and the oil from one of the ships landed on the beach. Back to you.
My goodness, and how do you go about cleaning that, right? Yep. Now, Mari, before you go, that ash cloud is still causing problems across Europe, isn't it?
Yeah, that is still a big concern because we did see some airports again closed, especially in southern Spain, big airports like in Sevilla, for example, and also as we head into the Canary Islands, we saw some problems in southern parts of Portugal, and that ash cloud continues to be very close. Look at this really cool picture. May 7th, there's the ash plume right going through there, continues to blow right through May 8th. You still see some weather systems over here that don't seem to affect it very much. That ash continues to shoot, the volcano continues to shoot that ash all the way down, and it looks to be a little bit less intense as we head into May 10th. But you know what? The damage has been done all across this area of the Atlantic, from where the origin of the cloud all the way down here into the south, even off the coast of Morocco. That's where we're seeing the surface to about 20,000 feet, where it is expected to exceed the aircraft jet engine tolerance levels. So those are the areas where we have seen some of those closures. Now, what we're going to see in the 20 to 35,000 feet level, that's cruising altitude, maybe seeing it spread a little bit more across northern Spain, maybe into parts of southeastern France here. But Eurocontrol was saying in their press release earlier today, Christy, that in those cases, the airports are not expected to be directly affected because they can still take off and land. They just will have to fly around it for anybody that would be trying to cross that airspace. So a little bit of good news here. We may see less airports that are actually affected throughout the day today. And into Wednesday, it all depends on the volcano and what it's going to do next, and that we don't know. Back to you.
It all depends. Mari, thank you very much for that. Up next, Sharon.
Welcome to the iDesk, everyone, where right now the environmental crisis from the Gulf Coast oil spill stretches all the way to Washington. Congressional hearings are getting underway. Live pictures to bring you now, coming to us from Capitol Hill. Aubriana Keeler is there. We'll check in with her in just a moment. But first, to the Gulf. BP is preparing for Plan B, lowering a small dome near the leak that could siphon oil from the water. Let's go to the front lines in Venice, Louisiana. That's where we find our own David Mattingly. And David, where do containment efforts stand right now?
What we're looking at right now is the deployment of a smaller dome, one that is only 5 feet tall, about 4 feet in diameter. They're thinking they'll have greater success with this at being able to deploy it over the largest of the remaining leaks at the bottom of the ocean. The problem with the larger dome that they were trying to use before was that it filled up with crystals formed by gas and water. It essentially clogged it up. So they set it aside. That was supposed to be in place early this week and protecting the Gulf of Mexico by siphoning that oil off to the surface. But that has now set this operation back about a week, and we're seeing about 5,000 gallons, an estimated, 5,000 barrels of oil leaking into the Gulf every day.
So let's be clear, what exactly is the course of events for the next 24 to 48 hours? Have they spelled that out to you?
What they plan to do is install this smaller dome over the top of that leak, and that will siphon off a large percentage of the oil that is now leaking into the Gulf of Mexico. They hope to have that in place by the end of this week, but recent estimates say that 80 to 85% possibly of the oil should be recovered to a containment vessel on the top of the water if this is successful. Then they're looking at another option that is about a week and a half to 2 weeks away that will stop the flow of oil completely. But none of this has ever been tried before. There are no guarantees. They've never worked this deep underwater trying to deploy any of these devices.
David, it's my understanding that there in Louisiana near the disaster site, a 6-member panel is holding hearings. Can you tell us about that, looking into this oil spill?
What they're looking into here in Louisiana is how this happened in the first place, why the fail-safe devices failed, why that explosion occurred on the oil rig, why the fire was not able to be put out, why the platform sank. All of these things, the loss of life, the catastrophe, that's what they're trying to get to the bottom of. Everything else that happened after this is something they're still working with, grappling with, trying to contain, trying to mitigate the damage that's being done by this oil slick.
David Mattingly joining us there from Venice, Louisiana. Many thanks. Well, BP says it's doing everything it can to prevent the spread of that massive oil spill into the Gulf of Mexico. Khalil McEdwards looks at what has failed and some of the unusual ideas that still might be tried.
This is the animation of the dome. This is what BP described as like lowering a 4-story high building onto the head of a pin. This effort failed when crystals built up inside the dome, but it's a procedure experts say that BP may come back to. Heating the domes, for example, might help. Now, here's Brown's rendition of BP's next expected step. It's called the junk shot, and this may be a long shot. Look at this, the plan, literally throwing garbage at the leak using high pressure to force down things like shredded tires, or you'll see in this animation, those white bits, golf balls, anything to go ahead and stop that leak. And finally, another plan that BP might try, adding another blowout preventer, literally sending it down on top of the failed one.
Colleen McEdwards there. Well, let's take you back to Washington now. Live pictures coming to us from Capitol Hill, where those congressional hearings are taking place, looking into that massive oil spill. Let's bring in our own Brianna Keeler, who is there. Brianna, who's in the hot seat on this day?
We've got the top officials for BP, which of course was leasing the oil rig, also the corporation Transocean, which owns the oil rig, and Halliburton, which had done work on the oil rig shortly before the April 20th explosion that caused this big mess. So what we're expecting to see, Aisha, in some of the testimony that we have been given early, is really some finger pointing. We are expecting the head of BP to say that Transocean is essentially at fault because that blowout preventer that you heard Colleen talking about failed to work. And then what we're expecting to hear from Transocean is the top official there saying, what do you mean? This is ridiculous. The idea that someone's pointing a finger at the blowout preventer doesn't make sense, because the blowout preventer is something that really comes into play while the oil well is being drilled, and this is an oil well that had been temporarily capped a short time before this explosion. And of course, Halliburton isn't going to escape this finger pointing. So I think what we're going to see in all of this is maybe a whole lot more questions raised than answers being given definitively. And one of the remedies, we should talk about some of the solutions being considered here in Washington about moving forward and making sure this doesn't happen again. We're also going to be hearing from a former chief of what's called the MMS, the Minerals Management Service, the government agency that regulates things like offshore oil drilling, oversees these rigs. We are hearing now from the administration that they're talking about splitting the MMS so that you have the folks, the officials who are in charge of regulating these oil rigs, separated from the people who are in charge of collecting royalties, payments to the government for the use of these leased lands, trying to eliminate what some very critical senators have called a conflict of interest here. Aisha.
Brianna, I know that this hearing just got underway at the top of the hour, but I have to ask you, as you speak to lawmakers there on Capitol Hill, what's your sense of the line of questioning? I mean, bottom line, how heated could this hearing get?
So there's two hearings today, and I think this one could get somewhat heated because you do have, it really depends on the senators that maybe are more inflamed about this particular topic. And there are a couple on this hearing this morning, but what we're really expecting is a lot of drama in an afternoon hearing. A few hours later, there's going to be another hearing. The same officials from BP, Transocean, and Halliburton will be answering questions from what's called the Environment and Public Works, or pardon me, the Environment and Public Works Committee, and we're expecting a lot of tough questioning there. They don't call it the hot seat for nothing, but we're really expecting to see that drama play out later this afternoon.
Brianna Keeler, there in Washington. Appreciate it. Thanks. At this point, I want to bring in Amari Ramos, who's at the International Weather Center. Mari, what's the latest picture you're getting of the oil slick itself?
You know what? We are seeing that this oil slick getting apparently larger from the satellite image that we've been seeing. And some of the forecasts right now, some of the forecast models are indicating that this could actually begin spreading a bit more to the east than it had been before. We had seen it kind of scooting over toward the western side of the mouth of the Mississippi, but now a little bit more toward the east. But, you know, one question that we get a lot, Aisha, is why hasn't the oil gotten to the shore? You know, all of these models were forecasting that this is going to happen already from 2 weeks ago, and it hasn't happened yet. So I want to tell you a little bit about what NOAA is actually using to do this. Well, they use a model called GNOME, or Genome, General NOAA Operational Modeling Environment, and it works by taking into account the wind, the waves, the currents, and how that would actually help to spread the oil onto the surface. Now, we haven't had a deep water blowout since 1979 in the United States. So there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to the forecast and how this will actually work. And this model takes that into account. You know, if the forecast right, is the forecast wrong, the weather forecast, I mean, and it tries to fix all of those little different variables. And it also takes into consideration the chemical changes. What happens to the oil when it stays in the water for a long time, and how does the weather affect that? But weather's not the only factor. You got to take into account also how the oil actually behaves. And they have another model that they're using in conjunction with a university called CDOG. And this one takes into account how deep water actually works. It's the Comprehensive Deepwater Oil and Gas Blowout model. Whew, long name. It's a 3D model, and this one takes into account the depth, the temperature, the salinity, the deep water currents, and also how all of these come into account and change the oil as it starts to move from the bottom of the ocean and it moves up to the shore. So they're trying to use all of these things, a lot of technology, to say where this is going to go next. But you know what? Even with this, there's a huge uncertainty line that carries all of this entire region that you see highlighted here. As to where this oil will actually move, what we do know, Aisha, is that there are still many areas that are potentially at risk in the immediate future should this forecast hold true and move the oil closer to land as we head through the next 24 hours. Back to you.
Mari, many thanks for that update. Appreciate it.
Well, actually, there's a growing sense of criticism here of the way BP is responding to this oil spill disaster. Specifically, the criticism has to do with the lack of what critics call lack of transparency on BP's part. There has been just very little video footage released from the ocean floor where this the leak is occurring, and critics say that BP is trying to control the message here, control the images, and in an attempt to kind of stave off how bad the PR front is here. This is the most revealing image we've seen so far of the actual oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. The short video shows robotic arms from an underwater vehicle capping one of the leaks. Look closely and briefly. In the background, you can see a dark cloud shoot into the water. 3 weeks after the explosion, this is the only glimpse of the leak BP has released. BP is in control of the video recorded by the underwater robotic vehicles. We're told by multiple government sources that these cameras have captured extensive video images coming from the site of the leak, 5,000 feet underwater. CNN has asked BP repeatedly since the explosion for video of the leak, but company officials will only tell us that they'll look into it. But environmentalists and scientists say BP's unwillingness to share this video highlights a bigger problem with the company's response to the oil spill. And the critics say that's a lack of transparency about the extent of the disaster. Aaron Viles is with an environmental advocacy group called the Gulf Restoration Network, a group that's been critical of BP's response to the oil spill. Well, why do you think we haven't seen much of that video yet?
You know, if I had to guess, it's that BP doesn't exactly want the public to see what's happening. They want to control the message, they want to control the information, but I think the public needs to see what's happening both at the surface and at the seafloor.
On Monday, we asked BP officials again about releasing the video. Once again, they said they'd look into it, but BP insists this isn't about controlling the message.
We're being extraordinarily open and transparent, whether it's ourselves or the government agencies involved. We're sharing tremendous amounts of information.
A BP spokesman also told us it's a question of priorities, but when it comes to putting out videos, the BP public relations team is finding time to post videos on the company's website touting its disaster response.
This is another report from the front line.
That's BP's CEO, Tony Hayward. He shows up in at least 4 videos.
I'm filming this in the Mobile Incident Command Center. I'm incredibly proud of the way in which I can see BP and the people of BP are responding to this terrible incident.
The BP videos do show the company's widespread response to the disaster, but these videos don't show you what it looks like when 5,000 barrels of oil a day spill into the Gulf of Mexico. And Aisha, what we're hearing over and over from environmentalists and scientists who are closely monitoring this is that they believe that what we're seeing on the surface of the Gulf of Mexico right now is essentially the tip of the iceberg, that much of the oil that has leaked is well below the surface of the water, so we're only seeing a portion of the damage. They believe the extent and the worst environmental damage is occurring well below the water, but right now BP says their #1 priority is getting this leak stopped. Aisha?
Ed Lavendera there in New Orleans. Many thanks, Ed.
Und langsam fragen sich die Menschen, was wird jetzt eigentlich mit unseren Flügen in den Sommerurlaub? Burkhard Wennemar berichtet.
Spektakuläre neue Bilder aus Island zeigen die Explosionen im Krater des Vulkans. Dabei spuckte Eyjafjallajökull auch immer mehr Asche aus. Deshalb mussten heute 9 Flughäfen in Spanien und Portugal zeitweise schließen, darunter auf Teneriffa. Schlechte Aussichten für Urlauber, die über Christi Himmelfahrt in den Süden fliegen wollen.
An der großräumigen Strömung ändert sich bis zum Wochenende nur wenig. Das heißt, die Asche wird weiterhin von Island genau nach Süden Richtung Iberischer Halbinsel transportiert. Und damit besteht die Gefahr weiterhin, dass Flughäfen in Spanien und Portugal geschlossen werden. Das gilt von Mallorca bis zu den Kanarischen Inseln.
Aber auch um ihren Sommerurlaub machen sich die Menschen zunehmend Sorgen. Denn der Vulkan kann noch Wochen oder Monate weiterspucken und niemand kann absehen, wohin die Winde im Sommer die Aschewolke treiben. Die Verantwortlichen haben allerdings viel getan, um ein Chaos wie im April, als die Aschewolke fast den gesamten europäischen Luftverkehr rund eine Woche lang lahmlegte, nach Möglichkeit zu verhindern.
Mittlerweile gibt es viel mehr technische Möglichkeiten, Aschewolken zu vermessen. Und es gibt auch neue Vorschriften, die eben nicht mehr vorsehen, dass bei der geringsten Aschekonzentration sofort der gesamte Luftraum gesperrt werden muss. Man kann jetzt gezielter vorgehen und das bedeutet, unterm Strich würden die Auswirkungen einer Aschewolke wie im April sicherlich etwas glimpflicher sein.
Trotzdem, bleibt der Vulkan weiter so aktiv, müssen Reisende immer mit einer Streichung oder Verlegung ihrer Flüge rechnen. Das sei, so Experten, wie eine Lotterie.
Bei einer Serie von Tornados sind im US-Bundesstaat Oklahoma mindestens 5 Menschen ums Leben gekommen, etwa 60 wurden verletzt. Ein besonders großer Wirbelsturm fegte über die Stadt Norman, rund 35 Kilometer südlich von Oklahoma City. Autos wirbelten über die Straßen, in Zehntausenden Haushalten fiel der Strom aus. Insgesamt wurden rund 50 Häuser komplett zerstört. Der Sturm schlug auch in Kansas und Arkansas zu. Dort kam zum Glück niemand ums Leben.
Well, there's the empty forecourt. It is extraordinary, isn't it, to think that the first Prime Minister to whom she said goodbye was Winston Churchill. And she's been on the throne all that time. She's met virtually every leader the world has produced. And this must be almost a routine now in her life.
Nick Witchell is down there at Buckingham Palace. We're looking past the Victoria Memorial at the front facade of the palace. Nick.
Yes, 19 minutes, I think, David, so far, which, as you say, is a little bit longer than we were led to believe it was likely to last. But he is still in with the Queen. His wife, of course, will have joined them by now. Many things will be on his mind. He will perhaps be sharing some of them with the Queen, as he will at those weekly audiences to which he will be coming generally every Wednesday night now. David Cameron, the youngest Prime Minister that this country has had for very nearly 200 years, which is a pretty remarkable thing. He will be leaving here, of course, and going straight to Downing Street, and he will be leaving as Prime Minister, enveloped by all the security and so on that that office involves. So, 20 minutes now after he arrived here to be invited by the Queen to form a government, David Cameron is still in there inside the audience room. There is no sign of his motorcar, the Jaguar, not yet moving up to the entrance, so one must assume that they have not been informed that that audience is about to come to an end, but clearly we will keep watching, and as soon as he does emerge, we will see him on his way to Downing Street.
Wochen nach der Explosion einer Bohrinsel im Golf von Mexiko bekommt der Betreiber, der britische BP-Konzern, das ausströmende Öl nicht zum Stillstand. Heute begannen die offiziellen Untersuchungen zum Untergang der Bohrinsel, bei dem 11 Menschen ums Leben kamen. In Washington mussten die Konzernschefs von BP America, Transocean und Halliburton unter Eid vor dem Energieausschuss des Senats Rede und Antwort stehen. Die 3 Konzerne schieben sich gegenseitig die Schuld für die Katastrophe in die Schuhe. Währenddessen suchen Experten verzweifelt nach Möglichkeiten, das Leck zu schließen. Der Versuch mit einer Stahlkuppel war am Wochenende gescheitert. Udo Lilischkis.
No, you cannot. Can you please back up?
Treten Sie bitte zurück. Sie können nur von der Straße filmen. Medien sind nicht erwünscht im Zentrum der Einsatzkräfte hier in Venice, Louisiana. Auch die von BP angeheuerten Fischer dürfen nicht mit uns reden. Ich kann nichts sagen zum Thema Öl, nichts. Gleich nebenan, Lasthubschrauber fliegen seit heute Material für einen künstlichen Damm zu einem der vorgelagerten Strände. Der Einsatz der Nationalgarde wird von BP finanziert. Wenn dieser Damm das verölte Wasser zurückhält, kann er die Tierwelt dort und das Marschland schützen. Doch der Großteil der Einsatzkräfte kämpft mit konventionellen Mitteln gegen das Öl, das inzwischen immer mehr Strände im Süden erreicht. Dass dort bisher nur einzelne Ölklumpen auftauchen, liegt am massiven Einsatz von zersetzenden Chemikalien. Das aber macht die schwimmenden Ölbarrieren noch nutzloser, die ohnehin immer wieder von Wind und Wellen an Land gespült werden. Und so hat das Öl leichtes Spiel. Das für das Mississippi-Delta so wichtige Schilf ist schon jetzt betroffen. Jede Flut bringt größere Mengen an Land, trotz der chemischen Großoffensive da draußen. Diese Chemikalien verhindern zwar, dass die Strände stark verseucht werden, aber sie verlagern das Problem ins tiefere Wasser. Sie sind ein stiller, geheimer Killer da draußen. Noch finden Tierschützer kaum verölte Vögel. Diese Katastrophe spielt sich in Zeitlupe ab, aber sie lässt sich nicht mehr stoppen. Dieser Experte ist von BP angeheuert worden, um Öl an Stränden abzupumpen. Er zeigt uns, wie das Öl von Chemie zersetzt, unsichtbar unter Wasser Klumpen bildet. Die Unterwasserströmungen rollen diese Ölklumpen dann in Richtung Land und ans Ufer. Unterdessen arbeiten BP-Techniker mit Tauchrobotern fieberhaft an verschiedenen Lösungen. So soll Ende der Woche die große Auffangglocke, die schnell vereiste, durch eine kleinere ersetzt werden, die leichter zu erwärmen ist. Gleichzeitig sollen geschredderte Gummiteile mit Druck ins Bohrloch gepresst werden, um es zu verstopfen. Allerdings geht das schief, könnte die 10-fache Menge Öl austreten.
Die Wasserschutzpolizei fährt Patrouille durch die verzweigten Kanäle des Mississippi-Deltas, um die Reinigungstrupps zu den besonders stark verschmutzten Uferabschnitten zu lotsen. In Alabama werden die ersten Teerklumpen an die Strände geschwemmt. Noch immer sprudeln täglich rund 800.000 Liter Öl aus dem Bohrloch. Diese neuen Aufnahmen vom Leck in 1500 Metern Tiefe zeigen, wie weißes Methangas und dunkles Öl unter hohem Druck ausströmen. Der Ölteppich breitet sich immer weiter aus. Die USA erleben eine beispiellose Umweltkatastrophe im Golf von Mexiko. Ratlos ruft BP schon übers Internet auf, Lösungsvorschläge im Kampf gegen die Ölpest zu machen. Denn schon Anfang der Woche ist der Versuch gescheitert, eine Metallglocke über das Bohrloch zu stülpen. Wie diese jetzt freigegebenen Aufnahmen zeigen, verfestigten sich Methangas und Öl im kalten Wasser und verstopften die Steigleitung. Inzwischen wurde eine kleinere, mit warmem Wasser beheizte Stahlkuppel abgesenkt. Als weitere Alternative soll das Bohrloch mit zerkleinerten Autoreifen und Golfbällen verschlossen werden.
Diese dringen in die Bohrung ein, werden von dem aufströmenden Öl nach oben bewegt und verkeilen sich an der Stelle, in dem im Verschlusssystem ein Spalt besteht. Und der wird dann durch diese weichen und flexiblen Partikel verschlossen.
Gleichzeitig hat BP mit einer Entlastungsbohrung begonnen, die aber Monate dauern kann.
Und dann wird man durch diese neue Bohrung in das alte Bohrloch Zement einfüllen und erst dann ist eine komplette Versiegelung möglich.
13.000 Helfer versuchen, das Öl von der Küste fernzuhalten. Eine gemeinnützige Organisation will mit Menschen- und Tierhaaren jetzt die Ölpest eindämmen. Friseursalons schicken tonnenweise Haare in die Küstenorte. Freiwillige Helfer stopfen sie dort in Nylonstrümpfe. Sie sollen das Öl auf der Meeresoberfläche aufsaugen, noch bevor es die Küste erreicht.
Eine angeblich geplante Flugzeugentführung in Berlin-Tegel für helle Aufregung gesorgt. Inzwischen hat sich alles als Missverständnis herausgestellt. Eine Frau hatte das Gespräch von 2 russischen Passagieren mitgehört und geglaubt, sie planten, die Maschine zu entführen. Sie alarmierte die Polizei, die das Flugzeug evakuierte. Jetzt steht fest, es handelte sich um russische Piloten, die sich über ein Sicherheitstraining in Berlin unterhalten hatten. Bei dem Flugzeugabsturz gestern in Libyen ist auch ein 58-jähriger Mann aus Hessen ums Leben gekommen. Ein zweites deutsches Opfer hat das Auswärtige Amt bislang nicht bestätigt. Experten suchen weiter nach Ursachen für das Unglück. Die Maschine aus Johannesburg war beim Landeanflug auf die libysche Hauptstadt Tripolis abgestürzt. 103 Menschen starben. Die meisten Opfer kamen aus den Niederlanden. Nur ein einziger Passagier, ein 9-jähriger Junge, überlebte schwer verletzt. Schon morgen wird damit gerechnet, dass der Ölteppich im Golf von Mexiko die US-Küste erreicht. Und jeden Tag strömen weite 800.000 Liter Öl ins Meer. Alle Hoffnungen ruhen jetzt auf einer kleineren, beheizbaren Stahlglocke, die das Bohrloch in 1500 Metern Tiefe abdichten soll. Vergangene Woche war ein ähnlicher Versuch gescheitert, weil Eispartikel das Abpumpen des Öls verhindert hatten.
Öl in Flammen im Golf von Mexiko, gezielt abgebrannt, um es von der Küste fernzuhalten. Anderswo diese rötliche Brühe, angeblich weniger gefährlich. Das Öl hat sich zersetzt durch den Einsatz von mehr als 1 Million Liter an Chemikalien. Doch auch das reicht nicht, um der Lage Herr zu werden. Täglich strömen immer noch etwa 800.000 Liter Rohöl ins Meer. Heute nun der zweite Versuch mit einer neuen, etwas kleineren Stahlglocke, das Leck in 1500 Metern Tiefe abzudichten. Mit Methanol und Wasser soll verhindert werden, dass sich wieder Eiskristalle bilden und das Absaugen des Öls verhindern. Im fernen Washington die Verantwortlichen im Kreuzverhör. Kongressanhörung zur Ölpest. Wie konnte es zu dieser Katastrophe kommen und wer trägt die Kosten für das Desaster? Wir werden alle legitimen Finanzansprüche begleichen, antwortet der BP-Chef. Auch die Verluste der Fischindustrie, fragt die Senatorin nach. Ja, antwortet er wieder. Auch die entgangenen Steuereinnahmen? Fragezeichen. Diese Fischer in Mississippi jedenfalls haben noch keinen Cent von BP gesehen und das, obwohl sie seit über 3 Wochen nichts zu tun haben. Wann sie wieder aufs Meer dürfen, kann ihnen zurzeit keiner sagen.
Now, CNN's Reynolds Wolf is standing by in Gulfport, Mississippi with details on that and other developments. And Reynolds, it sounds like the situation there is worse than we thought.
Well, that's the way it may be. We're still not sure on that. Certainly the situation is terrible. I mean, it doesn't matter if it happens to be 5,000 barrels or 70,000 barrels. Obviously, 70,000 much larger number, and certainly that would heighten the desperation. But still, it's a horrible situation. They're trying to stop the leak. And there's a number of ways they're going to try to do that. The latest way they plan on trying it is by actually putting in a smaller pipe right into the vent where you have the oil that has been coming out, as well as the natural gas. The game plan is to try to insert that at some point today and then send it all the way up to the surface, siphoning it to a tanker ship, a tanker vessel, and then they'll take that vessel and then take that oil and then bring it back to shore. That's one option. Second option is to use a smaller containment dome, put it right over the leak, and then the same thing would happen. They would siphon it back up to the surface to the oil tanker right at the very top of the water. Now, the third, and possibly one of the more interesting ways, is using what they refer to as a junk shot, where they would use bits of rubber, tires, golf balls. And the plan would be to actually fire it almost like in the effect of a giant shotgun into the leak, hopefully stopping it. Then they'd get a layer of mud, then a layer of cement or concrete, and actually try to seal it off that way. Those are the 3 options they've come up with. But again, the first one, entering that smaller pipe into the larger leak, they're going to try that one today. So it should be very interesting to see exactly how that plays out. Now, you were talking about the number of barrels, and that has really been a big thing of speculation. Now, it's been with the understanding of BP. They've basically been going along with NOAA and the Coast Guard, United States Coast Guard, that it's been about 5,000 barrels per day. Well, the new figure you're referring to, the 70,000 barrels per day, is something that came up by Steve Wesley, or rather, well, that's the name. Sure, we get the name. Wehrle is his name. Steve Wehrle. He's from Purdue University. And he's written a book about judging the flow rate of liquids. He was on Anderson Cooper last night. He had this to say.
So the estimate of 5,000 gallons you have a day, you have no doubt that is way, way low.
Right.
And you're saying it could be as high as 70,000?
Well, what I calculate from the video, which is just a snapshot in time, right? So for that particular 30 seconds that the video is running, the flow out of the pipe was 70,000 gallons per day.
Now, Professor Wehrle does have a little bit of a room for error. So it could be about 20% greater, meaning the amount of oil coming out, or it could be about 20% less. So that is a big leeway on either side of the line. However, even if it's on the low side, it could be, of course, obviously much higher than the guesstimated amount of 5,000 barrels per day. So again, huge mess. They're trying to stop it today, and again, it's continuing to grow as we speak. Let's send it back to you in the studio.
All right, Reynolds Wolf from Gulfport, Mississippi, thank you very much for that. Now, our Mari Ramos is also keeping tabs on where the oil is headed next, and she joins us from the International Weather Center. Mari.
Hey, Christy, good to see you. We are going to look at that. You know what? Again, the concern is going to be the winds and the prevailing winds, I should say, that continue to be out of the south and east, and that could push that oil closer to the shore, which is what we've continued to see. The areas that you see in red is the areas where you already have the beached oil. the circle around here would be that area of uncertainty, so to speak, or the more affected area. This is the Friday location and forecast of the oil. Notice the darker colors over here would indicate the areas where the oil is thicker. And we've seen this map before. This comes from NOAA, and they use a lot of different ways to try to calculate all of this. So as we put it in motion for Saturday, notice that oil getting closer because those prevailing southeasterly winds will be pushing this toward the Mississippi River Delta, we think, and then also a bit more to the north here, maybe toward the Mississippi coastline, at least a little closer to those some of those barrier islands out there. Yet again, will this happen? We'll just have to see how the forecast actually pans out, because, you know, we've seen a lot of changes in this. So those persistent southeasterly winds, maybe up to 30 kilometers per hour, not out of the question, and actually should be there. Not just Friday, but Saturday, maybe still even as we head into Sunday, and then begin to change again as we head into the latter part of the weekend and into next week, maybe again out of the north with a new cold front that will be moving through this area. And this is a cold front right over here, but this one will not be affecting the situation in the Gulf of Mexico. That will stay to the north, and we're expecting some strong thunderstorms with that again across parts of the U.S. Speaking of strong thunderstorms, you have that chance again as we head across parts of Europe. Very different weather patterns here. You have relatively mild weather here with all the greens that you see on the weather map on this side of Western Europe. But look at the temperatures here across the east. Moscow, you're at 21, warmer there than it is in London at 12, as you can see, 15 in Warsaw, 19 in Kiev as we head into Ukraine. And so we head south. Look at Athens, sizzling at 29 degrees right now, 25 in Istanbul. These warm temperatures give way to some pretty hefty thunderstorms across the area, and that will happen again as we head into the afternoon hours. It happened yesterday, happening again today. The severe threat, though, has gone down, not like what we had or what we were seeing yesterday, but still the possibility of some strong thunderstorms here across central parts of Italy as we head into southern Poland, back over toward Ukraine, and then eventually here popping up across the Balkans as well as we head through the overnight hours tonight. So definitely something we'll be monitoring very closely. Chris?
This was Piers Sellers in 2002, more than 200 miles above the Earth. In 2006, he was back there again, one of a small army of astronauts building a laboratory in space. Each time he's travelled on a space shuttle, but NASA plans to retire the fleet at the end of this year, meaning when he launches again, he'll be the last Briton to ever fly aboard one.
You know, we're coming to the end of the shuttle program. There were 5 shuttles. There are 3 left. Hoping that we close out the program with 3 surviving shuttles, and they get the respect they deserve. They're real milestones in spaceflight.
They've been taking freight to the International Space Station, and now weighing more than 400 tons and spanning 360 feet wide, that's almost complete. You must be very proud of the part you've played and others have played in building the space station.
I am very, very proud to have been part of this huge group of wonderful people who've done it. And, you know, I'm a fully paid up member of the team that built the space station, but it's been tremendous fun to be part of it.
It all began here for Piers Sellers. He got the space bug while a pupil at Cranbrook School in Kent. And inspired by his achievement, the students here today will be following his latest mission.
It's incredible, really, to go to exactly the same school as one of so few people who have ever gone into space before. It's really inspiring.
School for everyone seems dull, but if you actually work hard, you can get somewhere really high, like space.
Atlantis and Piers Sellers are prepped for liftoff, and when they launch it will be a truly historic moment, marking the beginning of the end of the 30-year Space Shuttle program.
Well, this is the California Nebula right here. This is a new image from NASA. It's the Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer. You're looking at some of the hottest stars visible in the night sky. Beautiful. You know what? It looks like one of those paintings, those, you know, hypnotic-looking paintings. Just another example of what else is out there.
I know, it looks like something from a really cool fantasy novel, you know? But I just like it. It's named after my home state, the California Nebula. Thank you, Mari, and have a great weekend. I'll see you next week. Now, this story is definitely for Mari. I know she's going to be watching out for this. The Space Shuttle Atlantis is prepped and ready for launch about 6 hours from now, as long as the weather holds. Atlantis and its 6 astronauts are set to blast off this afternoon to the International Space Station. It will carry a Russian research module and fresh batteries for the station. This is scheduled to be the last trip into space for Atlantis, the last one. it is to be retired after it returns from this 12-day mission. And here's a quick look back at the Space Shuttle Atlantis's long career. Now, construction started on Atlantis in March 1980. It took just over 4 years to complete. Now, the shuttle was named after the main research boat for a U.S. oceanic research facility. Atlantis was first launched on October the 3rd, 1985. Its first space flight was a classified mission for the U.S. Department of Defense. Atlantis will have flown 32 missions to space by the time it retires.
Oh, well, there you are. For astronaut Katie Coleman, it's kind of appropriate when the stars line up just right.
It's so great to have you live with us, Katie.
A break in training came just at the right time. At the same time, the shuttle Discovery was set to launch. Katie was our guest astronaut, but far more importantly, just off camera, stood husband Josh and 9-year-old son Jamie.
I mean, I did my 2 launches before he was born, and we talk about what it was like, but I think there's nothing like the enormity of a shuttle launch. I mean, in person.
Yep, that's about right, Amy. For Katie and family, with time together becoming more infrequent, they squeeze in and soak up as much as every precious second allows. After launch, the Saturn V Center to see an old moon rocket.
This is the final stage.
You know what? I think our Soyuz is smaller.
Jump a little. Okay, shout straight forward. Can you hear it coming back at you?
Then a trip over to Launch Complex 34. Most people don't get to see this place. It's not on the tourist tour. It probably should be.
They were breathing pure oxygen, and it was just a lot easier to have a fire.
Astronauts Grissom, White, and Chaffee died here. Apollo 1, 1967. There's a weathered wreath and a plaque. That's it.
They gave their lives in service to their country.
A flash fire in the command module during a test.
When you come out here to the Apollo 1 pad and you think of the comrades that we've lost and the lessons that we've learned, it puts it into perspective. There are risks attached that, I accept and my family accepts as well.
It's the kind of thing where you can wake up in the middle of the night and worry about it. Although if you go to that place, it's not a good place to be. It doesn't get you anywhere.
Of course, this old launch pad has some cool spots to explore.
I don't think anybody could be here during launch.
No.
And great climbing places for a kid. Astronaut moms think just like any mom.
I don't think we should go for the top.
That's pretty high, and it's pretty slippery.
A large part of the focus for Katie and Josh is keeping Jamie's life constant. Going to school, playing ball, doing chores.
He does the dishes and clears the table, and
it's about building a strong foundation so even when mom is flying, Jamie will stay well grounded.
Now, Katie is actually in Russia right now, Aisha. 5 weeks of training. She'll make one more visit there before she actually flies next December. And I talked to her this morning. She was asking, is the story going to run today? And I said, yeah, we'll make sure your family knows so they can record it for you. Aisha?
Fantastic. Hopefully she's watching CNNI where she is. Many thanks, John.
She can see it on CNNI.
That's right. And just remind all our viewers watching us today that they will be able to see the launch of Atlantis, its final flight. We will be carrying the pictures live for you here on this network at 2:20 Eastern, 2:20 p.m. Eastern time. We'll carry it live, so be sure to tune in.
But I also want to underscore the seriousness and urgency of this crisis. The potential devastation to the Gulf Coast, its economy, and its people require us to continue our relentless efforts to stop the leak and contain the damage. There's already been a loss of life, damage to our coastline, to fish and wildlife, and to the livelihoods of everyone from fishermen to restaurant and hotel owners. I saw firsthand the anger and frustration felt by our neighbors in the Gulf. And let me tell you, it is an anger and frustration that I share as president. And I'm not going to rest or be satisfied until the leak is stopped at the source, the oil in the Gulf is contained and cleaned up, and the people of the Gulf are able to go back to their lives and their livelihoods. Now, the most important order of business is to stop the leak. I know there have been varying reports over the last few days about how large the leak is, but since no one can get down there in person, We know there's a level of uncertainty. But as Admiral Thad Allen said today, our mobilization and response efforts have always been geared toward the possibility of a catastrophic event. And what really matters is this. There's oil leaking, and we need to stop it, and we need to stop it as soon as possible. With that source being 5,000 feet under the ocean's surface, this has been extremely difficult. But scientists and engineers are currently using the best, most advanced technology that exists to try to stop the flow of oil as quickly as possible. Our second task has been to contain the spill and protect the Gulf Coast and the people who live there. We are using every available resource to stop the oil from coming ashore. Over 1 million feet of barrier boom have been deployed to hold the oil back. Hundreds of thousands of gallons of dispersant have helped to break up the oil, and about 4 million gallons of oily water have been recovered. 13,000 people have been mobilized to protect the shoreline and its wildlife, as has the National Guard. This week, we also sent to Congress legislation that would provide us with the additional resources to mitigate the damage caused by this spill. And I asked for prompt action on this legislation. Now, it would help with cleanup efforts. It would provide unemployment assistance and job training to folks whose jobs are affected by this crisis, and it would help with the region's economic recovery. That's why this legislation is important. It would also help ensure that companies like BP that are responsible for oil spills are the ones that pay for the harm caused by these oil spills, not the taxpayers. This is in addition to the low-interest loans that we've made available to small businesses that are suffering financial losses from the spill. Let me also say, by the way, a word here about BP and the other companies involved in this mess. I know BP is committed to pay for the response effort, and we will hold them to their obligation. I have to say, though, I did not appreciate what I considered to be a ridiculous spectacle during the congressional hearings into this matter. You had executives of BP and Transocean and Halliburton falling over each other to point the finger of blame at somebody else. The American people could not have been impressed with that display, and I certainly wasn't. I understand that there are legal and financial issues involved, and a full investigation will tell us exactly what happened. But it is pretty clear that the system failed, and it failed badly. For that, there's enough responsibility to go around, and all parties should be willing to accept it. That includes, by the way, the federal government. For too long, for a decade or more, there's been a cozy relationship between the oil companies and the federal agency that permits them to drill. It seems as if permits were too often issued based on little more than assurances of safety from the oil companies. That cannot and will not happen anymore. To borrow an old phrase, we will trust, but we will verify. Now, from the day he took office as Interior Secretary, Ken Salazar has recognized these problems, and he's worked to solve them. Oftentimes, he has been slammed by the industry, suggesting that somehow these necessary reforms would impede economic growth. Well, as I just told Ken, we are going to keep on going to do what needs to be done. And so I've asked Secretary Salazar to conduct a top-to-bottom reform of the Minerals Management Service. This week, he announced that the part of the agency which permits oil and gas drilling and collects royalties will be separated from the part of the agency in charge of inspecting the safety of oil rigs and platforms and enforcing the law. That way there's no conflict of interest, real or perceived. We've also ordered immediate inspections of all deepwater operations in the Gulf of Mexico. And we've announced that no permits for drilling new wells will go forward until the 30-day safety and environmental review that I requested is completed. We're also closing the loophole that has allowed some oil companies to bypass some critical environmental reviews. And today we're announcing a new examination of the environmental procedures for oil and gas exploration and development. Now, as I've said before, domestic oil drilling continues to be one part of an overall energy strategy that now includes more clean, renewable energy and energy efficiency than at any other time in our history. But it's absolutely essential that going forward we put in place every necessary safeguard and protection so that a tragedy like this oil spill does not happen again. This is a responsibility that all of us share. The oil companies share it, the manufacturers of this equipment share it, the agencies and the federal government in charge of oversight share that responsibility. I will not tolerate more finger-pointing or irresponsibility. The people of the Gulf Coast need our help, and they deserve nothing less than for us to stand up and do whatever is necessary to stop this spill, prevent further damage, and compensate all those who've been harmed already. That's our job. It's also our job to make sure this kind of mess doesn't happen again. It's a job we've been doing. It's a job we will keep doing until this well is capped and the spill is cleaned up and all claims are paid. Thank you very much.
So who is at fault? BP placed responsibility squarely on another company called Transocean.
Transocean, as owner and operator of the Deepwater Horizon drilling rig, had responsibility for the safety of drilling operations.
Transocean pointed the finger at Halliburton, the company that provided the drilling supplies.
There was a sudden, catastrophic failure of the cement, the casing, or both. Without a failure of one of those elements, the explosion could not have occurred.
After Halliburton pinned the blame back on Transocean, the senators lost their patience.
I hear one message, and the message is, don't blame me. Well, shifting this blame does not get us very far.
All the while, the oil slick got closer to the U.S. coast. In the quick fix this week, President Obama is known to love his BlackBerry. So what does he have against high-tech toys for the rest of us? The president told graduating students in Virginia that 21st century media aren't really contributing to our culture.
With iPods and iPads and Xboxes and PlayStations, none of which I know how to work, information becomes a distraction.
A stern warning from a man who was elected president with the most ambitious online operation in U.S. history. This 2-meter cross in California's Mojave Desert was never meant to be a lightning rod. It was erected to honor casualties of the First World War on a remote patch of private land. But eventually it became part of a national park, government property. Civil libertarians sued, arguing the cross violated the separation of church and state, and the case went all the way to the Supreme Court. But this week things got even more complicated. Like a thief in the night, or because of a thief in the night, the cross disappeared. It will probably be replaced, but it might still be illegal. And you may have heard the name Nixon, as in Richard Nixon, the late U.S. president. Well, make way for Chris Nixon Cox. The 30-year-old grandson of the late president is running for the State House in New York. And does this smile look familiar? That's Jason Carter, grandson of former President Jimmy Carter. At age 34, he's the newest Democrat in the Georgia State Senate. Call it the next generation of family values. Speaking of family politics, further afield, the Aquinos are back in the Philippines. Benigno Aquino Jr. was an opposition leader assassinated in 1983 when he tried to return from exile. His murder galvanized Filipinos against dictator Ferdinand Marcos and led to the People Power Revolution that put his widow into the presidency. She died last year, but this week their son, Benigno Aquino III, was elected president on a wave of strong and sentimental support.
Na talagang humalinhin sila.
The people are continuing the role that my parents have started, which makes me very happy. I am sure they are thanking the Filipino people that all their sacrifices have not been wasted.
Welcome back. Strange times in the United Kingdom. The votes were cast, the results counted, and the confusion, well, it may be coming to an end. In any other time, the phrase changing of the guard would conjure up images of lockstep precision, even elegance. But this week it had a different meaning.
I love the job, not for its prestige, its titles, and its ceremony, which I do not love at all. No, I loved the job for its potential to make this country I love fairer, more tolerant, more green, more democratic, more prosperous, and more just.
Gordon Brown walked away from number 10 Downing Street and moments later resigned in person to Queen Elizabeth.
Her Majesty the Queen has
asked me to form a new government, and I have accepted.
Now it's Conservative leader David Cameron's turn.
Our country has a hung parliament where no party has an overall majority, and we have some deep and pressing problems. A huge deficit, deep social problems, and a political system in need of reform. For those reasons, I aim to form a proper and full coalition between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats.
Und nach Deutschland. Millionen Menschen frösteln in diesen Tagen und das Reizwort der Nation heißt wohl momentan Maiwetter. Im Durchschnitt ist es in den meisten Regionen 7 Grad zu kalt und wenn es so weitergeht, dann könnte es der kälteste Mai seit 20 Jahren werden. Stellt sich also die Frage, wann wird es endlich wärmer und haben wir noch Chancen auf einen tollen Sommer? Kai Reuker mit erfreulichen Antworten.
Strandurlaub an der Ostsee, irgendwie sieht der doch anders aus. 9 Grad kalt, das Ganze garniert mit Wind und kleinen Schauern. So bibberten sich am Timmendorfer Strand Feriengäste und Einheimische durch den Tag.
Viel zu kalt, es könnte wärmer sein.
Dass ich hier mir Jacken ausleihen muss, um nicht wirklich noch mehr zu frieren, finde ich ganz schön schlimm.
Also ein paar Grad wärmer würden wir uns schon wünschen.
Ein paar Grad wärmer, dann würde es wohl auch mit dem Spargel richtig losgehen. In Niedersachsen etwa konnten die Bauern bislang nur etwa die Hälfte der normalen Menge stechen. So bleibt der Spargel im Boden und nur die Preise schießen.
Am 24. Juni wird abgerechnet, am letzten Tag. Und bis dahin kann auch natürlich noch eine Menge passieren. Ich glaube nicht daran, dass wir das alles wieder aufholen können, was wir jetzt in Sand gesetzt haben.
Das Elend zeigt sich auch in nackten und kalten Zahlen. In Köln etwa blieben die Mai-Temperaturen bisher deutlich unter dem langjährigen Mittelwert. Während es in Süddeutschland durchschnittlich 2 Grad zu kalt war, waren es im Norden sogar 5 Grad unter dem Durchschnitt. Immerhin, es wird ein bisschen besser.
Auch wenn der Mai jetzt etwas kälter ist als im Durchschnitt, heißt das noch gar nichts für den Sommer. Der Sommer in diesem Jahr kann trotzdem wunderbar warm und trocken werden.
Allerdings müssen wir wohl für Mai mit bis zu 15% höheren Heizkosten rechnen. Kälteempfindliche Pflanzen sollten immer noch nahe der Hauswand stehen. Mai 2010 kein guter Monat für Eiscafés und auch nicht für Freibäder wie dieses hier bei Kassel. Aber geben wir die Hoffnung nicht auf, diese Bilder sind von 2006, da war der Mai ähnlich freudlos. Danach folgte ein Sommer und ein Sonnenmärchen.
Welcome back. You are looking at the launch pad at Kennedy's Space Center. The countdown clock is ticking and we're just a few minutes away from Space Shuttle Atlanta's last trip into space. And there are just 2 shuttle missions left after Atlantis retires. John Zarella is live at Kennedy Space Center. And John, it looks like perfect conditions there for liftoff. Ready to go?
Yeah, Rosemary, absolutely. I hate to jinx it. The weather has been spectacular here at the Kennedy Space Center, and the vehicle is in perfect shape. They have had absolutely no issues during this countdown towards the launch of Atlantis. And, you know, as you mentioned, this is supposed to be, probably will be, the last flight of the shuttle Atlantis, the orbiter flying to the International Space Station on a 12-day mission. Rendezvous on Sunday with the space station. The 6-member crew, once up there, will perform 3 spacewalks. And as all of these final missions are, the whole idea is to stock up and to supply the space station with as much stuff as they possibly can, because once the shuttles stop flying, it'll be a lot more difficult to get big stuff up there because of the limited cargo capacity in some of the unmanned cargo vehicles that are going to fly and on the Russian rockets. So, you know, that also brings up the point that there is a possibility, Rosemary, that NASA might add a flight sometime next year. There's a lot of movement towards that. A lot of people want to see that happen. No guarantee it will. But as it stands right now, this will be the final flight of the shuttle Atlantis. And then Discovery and Endeavour will take their turns on the launch pad before they are retired as well. But again, Rosemary, the astronauts are on board. Atlantis is fueled 500,000 gallons, liquid hydrogen and oxygen, and everything is counting down smoothly toward a launch here in about 35 minutes.
Yeah,
Rosemary?
Very exciting. John, you mentioned there that NASA may add another flight. You sort of feel, given what needs to be done, that they're going to have to do that in the end. But what are people saying about the shuttle mission coming to an end?
You know, if you talk to the folks certainly here at the Kennedy Space Center, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. Several thousand people will lose their jobs. The future is still up in the air, still uncertain as to what direction NASA is going to go, how much involvement and impact the commercial space industry is going to have, how much of a chunk will they be able to take over. So there are a lot of people here who are very, very sad to see the shuttle go. You know, in fact, last week, I had an opportunity to talk to John Young and Bob Crippen, who flew the very first shuttle flight back in 1981, interviewed them, and the two of them say, gosh, they should still keep flying these shuttles because they do a good job. Rosemary?
Oh, yeah. John Zarella there waiting for liftoff. Very exciting for all of us. I want to turn to Lola Martinez now with the launch forecast. And Lola, we're about 35 minutes away. Wow, it looks pretty good, though, that backdrop to John Zarella.
It does. It seems like he even may get a little suntan there because conditions are almost perfect. He said, let's not jinx it because that can happen. You know, anything can happen. But if you really take a look at this, the clouds are to the west, so we're seeing really clear skies, mid-20s, all that sunshine. It was almost like a picture-perfect weather conditions. Winds are a little bit out of the east-southeast, 20 to 30 kilometers per hour, but really gorgeous weather, so we'll keep on waiting. 30 minutes, a little bit over 30 minutes.
In New York to pay off his wife's debt. U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton owes some $770,000 to a consulting company from her 2008 White House bid, and anyone who fills out an online form or donates money to her website is eligible. What do you think? I mean, it's an extraordinary way. My wife's got a debt.
I think the Clintons can pay that, can't they? I would imagine that their time, you know, after the White House has brought in enough money to cover that debt.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
And book sales and stuff like that.
I suppose there are a lot of Hillary Clinton fans that would probably, you know, like to do this for both of them.
Yes, absolutely. And then those who want to spend a day with Bill.
I think aren't his haircuts about that cost?
Oh,
I think they cost about that much. I was reading that a while ago.
Yeah, so we'll have to see who
Forgo a haircut bill, and there we go, paid the debt.
There you go. All right, Candy, thanks so much. Appreciate it. And that does it for us here at the International Desk. I'm Rosemary Church. Don't go anywhere, though. Quest Means Business is next, right here on CNN.
Let's go now to the Kennedy Space Center and join the coverage in Florida from our sister networks, CNN Domestic, of course, in the United States. This is the Space Shuttle Atlantis about to blast off on its last flight.
Was able to build this space station. We are going to move on and develop new vehicles that will be in their place in their time.
Hey, John.
But right now, last couple of shuttle flights. Don?
Yeah, I want to jump in right now because, as I said, it's history in the making. Yep. Let's just listen into the last couple seconds and let our viewers hear the whole thing.
Solid rocket booster nozzle gimbal check. Firing chain is armed. Sound suppression water system activated. T-minus 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. Go for main engine start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And 0 and liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis, reaching the crest of its historic achievements in space.
Houston, Atlantis is in a roll. Roger, roll.
Houston is now controlling. The roll maneuver is complete. Atlantis is in a heads-down position on course for a 51.6 degree, 136 by 36 statute mile orbit. And the three main engines on Atlantis have now been throttled down to 72% of rated thrust, as the orbiter prepares to pass through the area of maximum dynamic pressure on the vehicle in the lower atmosphere. Engines now beginning to throttle back up.
Atlantis, you are go at throttle up. Copy, go at throttle up.
All three engines looking really good, back at full throttle now at liftoff. The fully fueled shuttle, boosters, and external tank weighed 4.5 million pounds. It now has burned half of that liftoff weight in propellant. 1 minute, 30 seconds into the flight. All three auxiliary power units that provide hydraulic power to the orbiter's systems in good shape, as are the fuel cells providing electricity to all of the systems on board. Atlantis is already 19 miles in altitude, downrange from the Kennedy Space Center, 20 miles, traveling 2,500 miles per hour. Coming up on staging, the point at which the twin solid rocket boosters burn out and separate from the orbiter. Booster separation confirmed. The onboard guidance system has done its job of settling out any of the...
Okay, the 32nd and final flight of Atlantis. It first made its first voyage in 1985, taking off there from Cape Canaveral at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The Discovery and Endeavour shuttles will also fly later this year. And then, of course, the 30-year shuttle program comes to an end. We've heard the announcement from President Barack Obama with his future plans of what he wants to do with the space program, but will not include the space shuttle program after 30 years of flight and about $173 billion of investment. We're going to take a short break. Quest Means Business continues right after this.
104% of rated thrust.
Welcome back. Some remarkable images to show you here. This is one of the tornadoes that whipped through the U.S. state of Oklahoma this week. Look at that. Our reporter David Martis sent in the video for us. He said that he shot it when the tornado dropped down really right in front of him on his way home from work. He's not one of these storm chasers who are out there looking for it. He's on his way home from work, and that's what he sees. The tornado was one in a series that hit the state this week. 2 people were killed. Lolo Martinez tracking more storms across the middle of the U.S. She's in the World Weather Center. It's sort of like a perfect shape, that one. I mean, sometimes there's sort of funnily clouds that look kind of broken up and erratic, but that one looked almost like a silo.
Yeah, that one was almost perfect. You know, it was. We even had our producer actually go out and do some storm chasing this week. I wish I could get some of these pictures. Maybe in the next segment I'll get them. But yes, perfectly formed. It was one of those weeks, Colleen, where we saw such a dramatic weather pattern across all these sections of the country. That really happens because of this time of year. It's that clash of cold and warm air. Well, those are perfect ingredients for all of this. You know, at the moment, we're not seeing such a dramatic weather pattern, but we are seeing storms, and you can actually see them bubbling up here into parts of Texas. Those storms eventually pushing into parts of the northeast, but they are going to dwindle down a little bit. The risk still is for some large hail, gusty winds, even some isolated tornadoes. We can see those red boxes, yellow boxes extended even into the mid-Atlantic. We can see some stormy weather here also across the southeast. Very hot and humid, and in fact we have been reporting some airport delays, especially there into Dallas, into Houston, across the northeast, JFK, Newark, even into Washington. You can see also the contrast in terms of weather. 11 degrees into Denver, and still those very high 20s, nearly touching that 30 mark. Hot and humid there into Atlanta, even into New York. We will see a little bit of a cool down for this weekend as the storms go by, and a little bit calmer weather as well across the Gulf of Mexico. Of course, our big story has been that oil spill, and we're keeping a very close eye on the weather conditions, the winds right now out of the southeast. We're not going to see much change, in fact, for the coming days. By the end of the weekend, we could see a shift in terms of winds from the north, and that could actually be good news in terms of pushing all that oil a little bit further away from that shoreline.
Into history, an Australian team becomes one of the youngest to voyage around the world solo and unassisted. Well, Jessica Watson is finally back on land after her history-making solo sailing trip around the world. So let's take a look at Watson's route. And she sailed out of Sydney Harbour on October 18th last year, travelling northeast through the South Pacific and across the equator, then south to Cape Horn at the tip of South America, across the Atlantic Ocean to South Africa, through the Indian Ocean, and then back to Australia. But now, some say the 16-year-old didn't travel far enough for her trip to count as a true round-the-world sail. But as Mark Burrows reports, even that criticism couldn't dampen Jessica's mood as she sailed into Sydney Harbour.
As entrances go, it could not have been more dramatic. Sydney in her sights and Jessica Watson storms home.
And even today, it's just a perfect day sailing out here, so I can't believe I'm heading in.
A couple of hours late, but the thousands at the Opera House weren't about to budge. Jess's Pink Lady, battered and barnacled, ploughed on. As she neared the finishing line at the Heads, it was like she was surfing on the wake of the welcoming flotilla. Then just before 2 o'clock, journey's end. And watching as Jess was swallowed by the fleet, Mum Julie.
She's so... Oh, look, it's just unbelievable. Like, you would never imagine so many people would get caught up in it. And it's just, yeah, I just can't believe it. I can't believe it. Even though I'm looking at it, it just still feels like you're looking at a thing on TV or something, yeah.
She left under a cloud of doubt and charged home in a blaze of adulation. It was Boxing Day in May. Jessica's little boat swamped by admirers. 210 days and the loneliness of the long-distance sailor was well and truly over. It was the great Jessica Armada churning up the harbour.
It's so chaotic. It's like, oh, I feel sorry for all the skippers around.
Her fan club extended to the skies. Customs was the first on board. Formalities over, her passport checked. Jess was officially home.
I just don't know what to think and what to say at the moment, so it's all a bit much, but absolutely amazing.
For 10 minutes or so, she had time to try and soak it all in. What was in front of her and what she had left behind.
I didn't want to come in, I was having, yeah.
You're just having too much fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The girl too young to drive, but who skippered her way around the world and into the hearts of so many. She tied up to the Opera House wharf and set foot on dry land, falling into the arms of her family. They laid out a pink carpet for Jessica Watson VIP. With her legs still wobbly, her brother and dad were there to support her as she came face to face with a new sea, an ocean of faces, those who followed her and were inspired by her journey.
She's been warned about what her welcome would be like, but I think that this sort of homecoming for a teenager would be very hard to digest, let alone one that's just sailed around the world.
The 16-year-old who kept the Prime Minister waiting.
3 cheers for our newest Australian hero, our Jess Watson. Hip, hip. Hip, hip. Hip, hip.
It started out as something that was a personal challenge, and it's become so much more, and it's amazing to be able to share it and inspire other people.
7 months at sea, and she still had the presence of mind to pick a bone with the PM.
I'm actually going to disagree with what our Prime Minister has just said. I don't consider myself a hero. I'm an ordinary girl who believed in a dream. You don't have to be someone special or anything special to achieve something amazing. You've just got to have a dream, believe in it, and work hard. As a little girl, people don't, expectations, they don't think you're capable of these things. They don't realise what young people, what 16-year-olds and what girls are capable of. And it is amazing that when you take away those expectations, what you can do. And I'd also like to think that by sailing solo, non-stop, unassisted around the world, that I've proved what really can be achieved when you set your mind to it, that anything really is possible.
Mark Burrows, 9 News.
What an inspirational young woman there, and she's right too.
Zumindest ein Teil des auslaufenden Öls im Golf von Mexiko kann seit heute mit einer Rohrleitung aufgefangen werden, teilte BP am Abend mit. 4 quälend lange Wochen hat das gedauert und es ist noch kein endgültiges Ende des Umweltfiaskos in Sicht. Denn alle Rettungsversuche sind mehr oder weniger Experimente. Das gab BP selber zu. Offensichtlich hat der Konzern, der allein im ersten Quartal dieses Jahres fast 6 Milliarden Dollar verdiente, kein Interesse daran, in schlüssige Notfallkonzepte zu investieren. Udo Lilischkis.
Es waren die ersten guten Nachrichten von der Unglücksstelle, seit alles begann. In das Hauptleck, so BP vor wenigen Stunden, konnten Roboter erfolgreich ein dünneres Rohr mit einer Manschette einführen, die den Rohreingang verschließt. Inzwischen wird der Großteil des Öls zu einem Tankschiff hochgepumpt. Währenddessen melden immer mehr Strände erste Ölberührung. Ein Einheimischer bringt uns zu Raccoon Island, einem wertvollen Naturreservat voller brütender Seevögel. Hier haben wir Öl am Ufer und es hat sich in den Pflanzen festgesetzt. Im Wasser ist kein Öl zu sehen, aber das muss nichts bedeuten. Der Ölfleck ist nicht weit weg. Dieser Strand hier wird höchstwahrscheinlich getroffen. Schon kleine Mengen reichen, um Eltern und Nachwuchs zu vergiften. Denn der Stoff, den BP hier versprühen lässt, ist von der Exxon-Valdez-Katastrophe bekannt. Corexit ist wirksam, hat aber in Alaska schwere Krankheiten und Todesfälle bei Reinigungsarbeitern hervorgerufen. Politiker in Louisiana fordern daher immer nachdrückliche Aufklärung über die Gefahren für Menschen und Meerestiere. Ebenso dramatisch neue Erkenntnisse über das ausgetretene Öl. Ein Forschungsschiff hat riesige, 15 Kilometer lange Ölwolken in großer Tiefe entdeckt. Zersetzt von Corexit könnten sie, so Wissenschaftler, zu ausgedehnten Todeszonen im Golf führen. Fieberhaft wird derweil an Methoden gearbeitet, das Öl an der Wasseroberfläche abzupumpen. Nicht nur staatliche Institute, sondern alle möglichen Unternehmer, hier Hollywood-Schauspieler Kevin Costner, bieten BP ihre Erfindungen an. Costner hat Millionen seines Vermögens in eine einsatzbereite Zentrifuge investiert. Die Maschine ist bereit, Probleme zu lösen, statt darüber zu reden. Doch der Einsatz ist fraglich, nachdem BP jetzt den Ölfluss zu stoppen scheint und die bisherigen Mengen im Meer versenkt hat.
In the Gulf of Mexico, a BP spokesman said that so far the system was working very well. Our correspondent in Washington, Madeleine Morris, gave me more details.
I was just on that conference call, Owen, where Kent Wells, the Senior Executive Vice President for BP here in the US, said that they had managed to insert that 4-inch tube into part of the broken riser and they were starting to pump out crude oil and some natural gas. He was quite coy about the exact amount that they were pumping successfully at this point. But he said that they were gradually increasing the flow. What happens then is the natural gas is being burnt off by a flare, which is actually on the ship, and the oil and seawater is being pumped into a tank where it will later be separated. So yes, some good news.
Airports in northern England, Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland are shut down. So far, London's Heathrow Airport, one of the busiest in the world, is still open, but that could change as winds shift the massive ash cloud. So let's find out what the weather is looking like in that particular area of the world. We shall do that with our Jenny Harrison. Jen.
Hey, Angela, not looking good at all, I'm afraid, because that ash cloud is set to encroach further across much of the UK. Look at this, through Monday, across into areas of northern France, the Low Countries and Germany. And, of course, we've got different concentrations of ash, but most of this that we're showing you here is from the surface up to 20,000 feet. We can just switch across now and have a look at Router 493 if we could. And this I want to show you because this is all the flights that are currently in place. Now, notice a big hole across central regions of the UK, most of Ireland, Scotland. This is where we know that planes have been grounded because of the ash. But I would have to say that I think come Monday, because that ash is going to be thick, very concentrated and heading further across the south, I think we can expect that we are going to see closures at the airports there because of safety concerns. If we can go back to my maps and I can just show you that what is going to be happening over the next couple of days is the situation will get better. I know that's no help to you if you are now facing the prospect of waiting at the airport, not knowing when you can rebook. But what we find as we go into Wednesday is the winds out from the west, this jet stream actually much further to the south, bringing the winds down towards Western Europe. But look at this. This is the most crucial part. We've got these very high, strong level winds, and they are going to be pushing, as you can see, in from the southwest. So that means all the ash is going to start to be pushed well to the north of Europe. Svalbard will see the ash pushing across there, but you can see here in the wind forecast over the next 48 hours, you see how the wind arrows change direction. They're still quite strong winds. Remember, they correspond with the legend at the top for the strength of winds, but look at this. You can see those winds, for the most part, taking that ash eventually up towards the north. And of course, Angela, all of this is based on models forecasting where the ash is going to go, assuming it continues to erupt from the volcano as it has been up until this point. And certainly for about the last 4 or 5 days, it has been very active indeed.
News for you now. More trouble from the ash cloud over Europe. Officials in the UK say the ash is forcing the closure of Gatwick and Heathrow airports starting at midnight GMT. That closure will last for 6 hours. Airports in northern England and in Ireland were already closed on Sunday. Bringing more updates on that as soon as we get them. Now, progress in the Gulf of Mexico. BP says it's successfully siphoning some oil from that hemorrhaging well. So far, this appears to be the first thing that's working in containing the spill. CNN's David Mattingly has been tracking this procedure from New Orleans. He joins us live with the latest. David.
This is the first bit of success to report in this attempt to slow down the flow of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. What BP has done, they've put an insertion tube inside that leaking pipe, and they're now siphoning oil up to the surface to a containment ship where it's going to be separated and processed. What we don't know right now is actually how much oil that BP intends to trap using this technique. There have been estimates that there are 5,000 barrels a day leaking into the Gulf of Mexico. Others have placed it at more than 10 times that amount. But at this point, BP says that they hope to optimize this process in the next couple of days and should be able to tell us exactly how much oil they are truly capturing and keeping from going into the Gulf of Mexico and polluting that environment. Then they have another plan to go 7 to 10 days from now, a plan that they believe will completely stop the flow of oil. But for right now, the first bit of success to report in more than a week of very technical and trying attempts to stop this oil.
Thus far, David, how great has the damage been to the surroundings and also to wildlife?
Because of the way they've been approaching this, applying dispersant at the subsea level and apply massive amounts of dispersant on the surface, we have not seen a great deal of oil hitting the shores, just decimating a coastline. We have not seen that. There has been some wildlife that has been caught in some of the oil. We have seen some birds and some creatures doing that. But at this point, what the concern is that we know all of this oil has been going into the water. We just have not seen this huge oil spill forming on the top because of the way the dispersants have been working. The question is now, what are all these hydrocarbons that are in the environment? What are the long-term effects that's going to be? Because in many ways, this has been a huge experiment. There's never been something this big tried on this type of scale and in this type of way.
We shall be watching it as it develops. Thank you very much, David Mattingly there.
The final mid-course correction burn complete as Atlantis.
Copy. Thanks, Chris. We're putting block 20 Charlie inward.
And the International Space Station made a beautiful pass high above the Andes Mountains, tracking northeasterly across South America.
And station, start photos. Copy. Stop bottom side.
Station crew given the go to start the photos. They're conducting the photography across the entire underside of Atlantis's thermal protection system.
Hey, thanks for the pictures. It's all about the pictures. We appreciate your work.
Atlantis and station on the big loop. On behalf of both the shuttle and station flight control rooms, your go for docking.
Atlantis copies, go for docking. Thank you. Houston and station capture confirmed.
220 miles above the South Pacific, Atlantis has arrived at the International Space Station, the first visit of Atlantis in 6 months since the STS-129 mission last November. The docking took place at 9:28 a.m. Central Time. 1 day, 20 hours, 8 minutes into Atlantis's voyage to the International Space Station.
The 3-decade-old space shuttle program is nearing its end, and there are just 2 missions left. Discovery will be used for the final shuttle flight, set for liftoff on September the 16th.
Executives say that a move to siphon the leaking oil to a tanker on the sea's surface is working extremely well. CNN's Ed Lavandera has more on the latest effort. He joins us now live from New Orleans. Ed.
Hi, Adrian. Well, BP is saying that this process is working extremely well. However,
they can't say just how much oil or natural gas is actually being siphoned into this insertion tube and onto a vessel, a container vessel on the surface of the Gulf of Mexico. However, they do say that this is the first first sign of progress that they've had since this oil rig explosion, and it collapsed almost 4 weeks ago. So a little sliver of good news here as officials still try to determine just how successful this insertion tube process. And just to give you an idea of how it works, this is essentially a mile-long tube that has been dropped down into the Gulf of Mexico, and it is inserted into the riser, the tube that comes out of the ocean floor that it had been bringing oil up to the surface. This is about 600 feet away from the oil head on the floor of the Gulf of Mexico. That tube was inserted inside of there, a smaller tube, and that begins the process of siphoning it off. It's a slow process. They say over the next day or two, they will really start kind of trying to open it up as much as possible and start taking in as much oil and gas as possible. The concern is that at these temperatures and in the conditions that they're working at, this has never been done before at this depth, that these tubes could be clogged and then essentially would just kind of kill this entire process. So there is concern. So as they're doing that, they're also moving ahead with another process that could be put into place about a week from now, and that is the process that involves two steps, what they call the junk shot, which is essentially through the valves of the blowout preventer, just throwing in a bunch of junk that would minimize the pressure coming out from the ocean floor, the oil, and then sending in what they call top kill, which is this special mud that is used to essentially cement the oil rig itself. So that would essentially stop the flow. If that could work, we're still about a week away from that. BP officials yesterday described a little bit better what exactly that process entails.
Our anticipation is that we will pump the kill mud into the well. If we can get sufficient kill mud to go down against the flow, we'll be able to kill the well in that manner. If too much of the kill mud goes up the well along with the flow, then that's when we'll attempt the junk shot, which we have been testing for 1.5 weeks on shore.
So imagine, all this oil and gas is coming up with intense pressure. They need enough to be able to push that back down to stop the flow of this oil well. If none of these steps actually work, remember there's also that other option, those relief wells that are being dug alongside this oil wellhead, but that is still several months away from being completed. Adrian?
All right, Ed, many thanks indeed. Ed Lavandera in New Orleans. That's it for World Report. In London, I'm Adrian Finnegan. Stay with us on CNN. Coming next, it's World Sport.
Und falls Sie dachten, den Namen Eyjafjallajökull langsam wieder vergessen zu können, falsch gedacht. Die Vulkanasche ist noch in der Luft und sie hat wieder viele Flughäfen lahmgelegt. An die 1000 europäische Verbindungen fielen heute aus. Besonders betroffen waren Großbritannien und die Niederlande. Am Amsterdamer Flughafen Schiphol mussten die Maschinen bis zum Mittag am Boden bleiben. Die meisten Sperrungen sind mittlerweile wieder aufgehoben. Der Flugverkehr über Deutschland war nicht beeinträchtigt.
Dann von der Aschewolke, die sich deutlich von den Wolken abhebt und hier Richtung Südosten reicht und ja auch heute wieder einige Behinderungen im Luftverkehr hervorgerufen hat. Allerdings wird sich die Strömung sehr schnell ändern. Vor diesem Tief dreht die Strömung auf Südwest, sodass die Aschewolke dann nach Nordosten getrieben wird. Und wir bleiben zunächst noch in dieser kühlen Nordwestströmung. Das heißt also bei uns, das, was jetzt an Asche noch hier im Westen in der Atmosphäre ist, das wird sich auf jeden Fall noch verteilen. Wie, muss man noch abwarten. Die Temperaturen unter diesem Tief auch am kühlsten 10 bis 15 Grad. Die Warmluft hier auch morgen noch über Osteuropa und warm auch im Südwesten Europas. Die nächsten Tage kann sich die Warmluft wahrscheinlich noch ein bisschen weiter dann auch Richtung Westen ausbreiten. Dafür wird es dann in Skandinavien etwas kühler. Das war's vom Wetter. Ich wünsche Ihnen noch einen schönen Abend.
Die von Menschen produzierte Ölpest im Golf von Mexiko überfordert nun die Menschen, die ihrer Herr werden sollen. Das gesammelte Know-how und die gesammelte Hardware der Ölindustrie scheitern bisher. Die Freude gestern, dass es gelungen ist, wenigstens einen Teil des Öls abzufangen, das aus der gebrochenen Leitung am Grund emporschießt, war übertrieben. Und inzwischen hat man auch das Öl wieder entdeckt, das irgendwo verschwunden schien. Es ist noch da und lauert in riesigen Wolken unter der Meeresoberfläche. Die Region muss nun damit fertig werden, mit einem unheimlichen Gegner, der sich Zeit lässt. Heike Slansky berichtet.
Eigentlich gibt es nichts zu feiern am Golf von Mexiko. Doch diese Jazzmusiker wollen helfen. Ein Benefizkonzert in New Orleans für die Fischer aus der Region, deren Existenz auf Messers Schneide steht, die seit Wochen ihrer Arbeit beraubt sind, keine Einnahmen mehr haben. Auch Hollywood-Größen zeigen sich solidarisch und schockiert. Dass die Ölfirma nicht die gesamte Verantwortung übernimmt, das ist beschämend, eine Sünde, kriminell. Wenn Bürger eine Straftat begehen, wandern sie in den Knast. Nur bei den Ölfirmen passiert nichts. Immer noch sprudeln etwa 800.000 Liter Rohöl täglich ins Meer und das schon seit fast 4 Wochen. Jetzt endlich mal eine gute Nachricht. BP ist ein neuer Versuch gelungen, in 1600 Meter Tiefe ein Absaugrohr in die beschädigte Steigleitung einzuführen, um einen Teil des Öls in einen Tanker zu pumpen. Rund 1000 Barrel Öl am Tag saugen wir so ab, längst nicht alles, aber immerhin fließt dieses Rohöl nicht mehr ins Meer. Und trotzdem, Wissenschaftler schlagen Alarm. Sie haben riesige Ölschwaden unter der Oberfläche entdeckt, bis zu 16 Kilometer lang und 5 Kilometer breit. Bist du eine Krake, eine Krabbe oder ein Fisch, dann hast du jetzt richtig Mühe zu atmen. Durch den massiven Einsatz von Chemikalien ist das Öl an der Oberfläche stellenweise nicht mehr sichtbar. Doch damit ist das Problem längst nicht aus der Welt. Wir haben noch nie Chemikalien in diesem Umfang benutzt und wissen gar nicht, mit welchen Konsequenzen für den Meeresboden langfristig zu rechnen ist. Derweil geht die Ursachenforschung in Washington weiter. In einer Kongressanhörung wollen Senatoren wissen, ob sich die Behörden zu sehr auf die Ölindustrie verlassen hätten. Die Heimatschutzministerin gibt sich unnachgiebig. Selbst wenn BPs Maßnahmen heute erfolgreich waren, ändert das nichts an unserer Haltung. Wir werden nicht locker lassen, solange das Bohrloch nicht versiegelt ist, das Öl beseitigt ist und alle Schadensersatzforderungen beglichen wurden. Der Kampf gegen die drohende Ölkatastrophe am Golf von Mexiko. BP glaubt, in 10 Tagen die Misere im Griff zu haben. Bis dahin soll das Bohrloch gestopft sein. Doch über Langzeitfolgen kann bislang keiner genaue Prognosen wagen.
20 tar balls, similar to the ones we're going to show you in a second. There they are. They were found on a beach in Mississippi. Well, they've been found in the Florida Keys. That's much further out. Authorities are testing them to determine whether they came from the BP oil spill. Researchers say that's unlikely, but not impossible. So we'll continue to follow that, because if those tar balls have reached that area of the United States, we're talking a much bigger area that's been affected. Now, that's the environmental fallout. What about the possible political fallout over the huge oil leak off the southern U.S. coast? Chris Owens, the head of offshore drilling at the U.S. Interior Department, is retiring earlier than planned. That's him. That's after being sharply criticized over the Gulf Coast oil spill. And right now on Capitol Hill, preparations are underway for Senate hearings, and they're trying to assess the response to the spill so far. Day 2 of questioning begins in about 15 minutes. The Obama administration said the disaster is far from over. Brianna Keeler is on Capitol Hill now to tell us more. What should we expect really on Capitol Hill around 11 a.m. Eastern, Brianna?
Well, what's really interesting, Hala, and we've been covering hearings now for about a week, and this is the 5th one, but this one is particularly significant because the Secretary of the Interior, Ken Salazar, is going to be testifying. He is a top official in the Obama administration, and he is in charge of the group of the officials who are in charge of regulating this offshore oil drilling on federal offshore lands. So this is really the first time that we're going to be hearing some tough questions asked of someone who is supposed to be responsible for making sure things like this don't happen, or making sure that oil companies are regulated. And there certainly have been some questions about whether this group of officials, this other group in the Department of Interior called the MMS, the Minerals Management Service, which is in charge of these oil leases, if maybe they haven't been too cozy with oil companies, if maybe they haven't been tough enough on oil companies, and if perhaps that may have contributed to this disaster. So we're going to be hearing some tough questions there, but we're also going to be hearing from Secretary Salazar as he details a new plan to break up this MMS. What he announced last week is that he was going to essentially break this group in two, or this oversight group in two, because you've got the MMS dealing one with collecting royalties, so they're basically the landlords, right, for these oil companies, so they're collecting rent on these oil leases, but they're also in charge of regulating these oil companies that are drilling these wells. So those responsibilities are going to be separated, and Hala, we're going to hear today a little bit more about how the Department of the Interior plans to do that.
And it's always an issue, isn't it, on Capitol Hill with politicians. We saw it with the banking industry, now the oil industry. These industries finance political campaigns, and then when something goes wrong on Capitol Hill, you see some tough questioning. I mean, there is sometimes a conflict of interest, isn't there?
No, I mean, I think that there is, and I think that you can see, you know, I think it also falls along regional lines too, though, because in general, what we've seen is Democrats who have come down very hard on oil company executives. Republicans expect them to really step it up today, because they instead will be coming down very hard on the Obama administration officials, Democrats, and how they have been regulating. But no doubt about it, what you have is certain members of Congress where this industry, oil development, is very important, say, to their state. I mean, just to think of one Democrat, Mary Landrieu, who's kind of singing a different tune than some other Democrats, which is to say, look, this is horrible. We also don't want to completely stop drilling, and that's a huge part of the economy of her state, so we're seeing it along regional lines, Hala.
Okay, thanks very much. Brianna Keeler is live on Capitol Hill. Well, we were talking about worries, environmental worries, before we spoke with Brianna. And there are new worries that the oil in the Gulf Coast may have entered an ocean current. What does that mean exactly? Mari Ramos joins us again for that. Hi there, Mari.
Well, you know, Hala, the concern is that if the oil is in one of these larger currents in the Gulf of Mexico, particularly the loop current, is what it's called, it could help transport that oil much quicker than originally planned. And that has been a fear for environmentalists and scientists alike. Let's go ahead and take a look over here at the latest satellite image of the oil. Now, here's the Gulf of Mexico. Here's Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and here is Florida. Well, the tar balls that they found were way down here off the coast of Key West. This is what the oil slick actually looks like. And notice you have this big plume here, and then an area that extends all the way out right over here. And this is on the surface of the water. Well, this is huge. It's about 350 kilometers long. So we're talking about a wide area. Full 1% of the Gulf of Mexico has oil on top of the water. So that's very significant. And way down here is something called the loop current. It actually comes in off of the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula and kind of swirls around. It brings all of that warm air, water, I should say, into the Gulf of Mexico. And then it's kind of exits back out through the Gulf out of the Florida Straits. Well, if some of this oil has gotten into the loop current, it could help transport it very quickly into portions of Florida, and maybe eventually, by some accounts, could happen into the Atlantic. This will take a while, though. It will take about a month or so for that oil that is here to actually move as the current continues to move about 80 centimeters, let's say, every single day. So it does move rather slowly. Now, there are other eddies that can develop, and that is why we're seeing some of that oil being pushed a little bit more to the west. And that's not unusual either, and these are things that they were actually counting on. What are we talking about? Well, this is off the coast of Louisiana, and look at that gook. This is what they found on some of the beaches there in some areas. Not a lot of it, but enough, you know, of this. And also these tar balls that everybody keeps talking about. These are toxic substances, and authorities say, you know what, you find this on the beach, don't touch it. You got to call the authorities to come get it, because this is, after all, oil. But I do want to show you this, and if I just have a couple seconds to show you, these are the tar balls that they found off the coast of Florida. Do they come, Hala, from that oil slick all the way out there off the coast of Louisiana?
How big is that? I can't tell. I mean, oh, there's a pen. So it shows you kind of how big they are.
So they're not very big. They're about this big, but they found at a rate of about 3 of them every single hour starting yesterday. And so they're worried, they're concerned that they may come from there, but still.
And how long before we know if they do come from that?
They're doing analysis right now. They're doing analysis today and tomorrow. So we should know in the next couple of days what the origin, what the source of these tar balls could possibly be.
All right. Thanks very much.
Sure.